If you're not new to my channel, you'll probably find yourself thinking, have I seen this before? You have, because this is a re-upload of my big 3-hour Doctor Who video, but before you click off, there's a lot of new stuff. The main addition being a 40-minute epilogue at the end of the video, going over Season 1, also known as Series 14, in detail. And if you've seen this video before and you're just here to see that, then skip to this time. Why didn't you just upload that as its own video? Why are you sticking it onto the end of an old video that you're now re-uploading? Well, I'll tell you. For starters, there are a few other segments of the video that I've made little changes to, and I'll put a comment in the description with time codes to those and explanations for what I changed and why I changed it. But the main reason is because the BBC copyright claimed it and started taking all the money that it was making, so yeah, I'd like to fix that if possible. So without any further ado, here's the original video. The year is 1986, and Doctor Who is on the chopping block. After a controversial few years under showrunner John Nathan Turner, resulting in increasingly low ratings, the show had been axed, and it was only through the rallying cry of very devoted fans and one extremely banger song, Doctor in Distress, let's all answer his SOS, that the show was able to get back on the air. Hans Zimmer was involved with the production of the song. I'm not even fucking with you. Now, even though the show would be returning, its future was tenuous at best, and if it wanted to survive much longer, it would have to prove itself to BBC's higher-ups. The show was on trial, so John Nathan Turner and script editor Eric Sayward leaned into it, creating The Trial of a Time Lord, a special season of the show comprising 4 stories.
The accused will remain silent until invited to speak.
The accused? Do you mean me?
And if he is found guilty, I strongly suggest the termination of his life.
They also brought back one of Doctor Who's most popular writers of days past, Robert Holmes, in order to aid them in this effort. The show's future hinged on the success of this season. And having seen it, I can say that that's very unfortunate.
Protect me! I am your lord and master!
Working on Trial of a Time Lord is what killed Robert Holmes. The show was never truly able to recover in the ratings, and just a few years later, it would be cancelled forever. Meaning until 2005. Now, why am I opening a video about the 60th anniversary on this tidbit? Well, because sometimes history has a habit of repeating itself. I'm just kidding. That's how I would open the video if I was a negative Nancy. Because no matter what your opinion of the new Doctor Who episodes is, there's no way you can say they're as bad as Trial of a Time Lord. And plus, the BBC was actively conspiring to take the show off the air in the 80s, whereas now it seems like they're relying on it like a lifeline. So these two periods in the show's history are very distinct. And yet, despite all this, there are still some serious similarities, especially where the court of public opinion is concerned. But before we get into all that, let's celebrate. 60 years of Doctor Who, ladies and gentlemen. This one television show has been on the air entertaining scores of annoying halfling people, and some adults too, for 6 decades, carving itself a place in television history and spreading British propaganda to foreigners like me far and wide. I would have been brainwashed into unconditionally loving Britain by now if it weren't for all the commenters that derogatorily called me American and said I wasn't allowed to have an opinion on the show because of this. Even though I'm not American, I'm Canadian, and guess what? So was the guy who came up with the idea for the show. Google it. You motherfuckers, we give you the idea and this is how you repay us. Fucking ungrateful. No other show in history has changed as much over such a long period of time as Doctor Who, making it In my opinion, one of the most interesting shows out there to analyze. Sure, there were some rough patches here and there, but if this show were a person, it could start thinking about retirement. That's an accomplishment worth celebrating. However, I do fear that Doctor Who in its old age may be having something of a midlife crisis, because it's really trying to recapture its youth. Following an especially controversial few years under showrunner Chris Chibnall, the show is officially resetting back to season 1, and Russell T Davies, the man responsible for helming the show's most critically beloved era, is back at the wheel. But that's not all. They also brought back David Tennant, who was the face of this era, and Murray Gold, the composer of this era, and all the producers that produced this era, and presumably the head janitor from this era as well. Russell also brought back everybody's favorite red-headed companion, Melanie. Melanie was introduced in Trial of a Time Lord, fun fact. And thank God they brought her back, because I don't know if these specials would have worked if they hadn't included the only good companion Doctor Who's ever had. And perhaps most shockingly, the show will now be funded by Disney going forward.
I've got money. Yes, you have.
It's official. The Americans have Doctor Who. Abort. It's been pointed out to me that I kind of accidentally foreshadowed a lot of these developments in my last video about Doctor Who. She's like Disney's version of the Doctor. The Seventh Doctor has become a cult favorite in the Whoniverse, which is a word I've never used before and hopefully never will again. Who will the next Doctor be? What will they be like? Will they be another 11th Doctor clone? Will it be David Tennant? I think the universe is playing a cruel joke on me. What's important is that the band is back together. And they even gave David Tennant enough hair gel this time. Maybe they even overcompensated a little just because of how much they messed up with the 50th. It's so flat. So, yay! They brought Mr. Good Writer Man back. Doctor Who is saved. The end. How much video is left? Oh my goodness.
I think the story hasn't ended yet.
Chibnall bad. This sums up what the Doctor Who discourse has been for the last 6 years. Ratings down, fans unsatisfied, retcons that people don't like, etc., etc., etc. In the lead up to the 60th, the discourse surrounding the show had gotten quite nasty.
Why don't you just die?
I mean, pretty much everyone's contributed to it to some extent, including me. The very first attempts at video essays I ever made on YouTube were about Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who, and I have grown to hate these half-baked ass videos, but that's not the point. The reason I never followed these up with any more Chibnall bad videos is because, well, it's already been said. Even though I still strongly dislike Chibnall's era, there's no reason to milk it for video after video after video of repeating the same talking points over and over and over and over and over. But out of this backlash was born a backlash to the backlash. Chibnall's era has found its fans online, who are increasingly dismissive of common criticisms of the era. And I think currently there's less agreement amongst fans on how to properly criticize this show than there's ever been before. And if we're gonna proceed, we need to establish a definitive framework through which I can criticize this show. Definitively. A lot of the runtime in my original Chibnall video essays focused on how I perceived the filmmaking to be very shoddy and amateurish at times. But a fan of Chibnall's era might retort by saying, the show has always looked cheap, so why are you singling this era out? Some of them might even go on to say that campiness is a part of the show's identity and should be encouraged. Let me give you an example. Here's a moment from the Series 2 premiere, New Earth. So, it's obviously laughably bad, but it's also undeniably hilarious and kind of charming. And if you happen to like camp, this was practically made for you. Oh, and fun fact, for some reason Doctor Who has never been able to do falling shots well. I don't know why, it's just a consistent rule. So here's my question. Is campiness in Doctor Who a good thing? I mean, sure, it can take me out of a scene, but at the same time, it does bring me a lot of enjoyment. Like, you wouldn't say that the campiness should be taken out of something like a Rocky Horror Picture Show because that's the appeal. I mean, Doctor Who's reboot was based on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, another show people love for being cheesy. Is Doctor Who in the same boat? Let's just put a pin in that for a minute. What's a more objective critique? What about pointing out a hole in the show's logic? That's fair game, right? Well, you'd think, but there are a lot of people who very avidly swear that logical inconsistencies don't matter because this is an inherently goofy and ridiculous show. And when a show is funny goofy, it doesn't have to make sense. You'll see this all over Twitter or in any comment section criticizing the logic of an episode. It's a dumb family show, it's meant to be fun, not to make sense. If it were trying to be some sort of hyper-realistic sci-fi, not every alien would just look like a human with their face painted red, and the rules of time travel wouldn't change every week depending on who's writing the episode. Shut up and enjoy it. And plus, the Doctor Who universe is so expansive that trying to hold true to every last tiny diminutive piece of lore the show has ever put out there would be an almost impossible task, and even if you did, it might limit your options as a writer, right? Before we can go any further, dear viewers, I need to answer both of these questions right here, right now. And to do this, I need to ask another question. Yeah, we're getting somewhere, I promise. What kind of show is Doctor Who? I mean, for us to know whether cheesiness is good and a lack of logic is fine, we first need to definitively say what Doctor Who's goal as a piece of art is. For example, a sitcom's goal above all else is to make you laugh. A soap's goal is to make you cry, an action film's goal is to excite you, a mystery film's goal is to intrigue you. So what is the goal of Doctor Who, a show that's always changing? Should it be first and foremost educational? That was the original purpose of the show when it first hit the airwaves.
It's an Aztec mask. Well, he must have died around 1430, I should think. How'd you know that? All these things belong to the Aztecs' early period.
Though with the popularity of the Daleks, that quickly stopped being the case. Or should it be scary? That's what the show was most known for the first few decades of its run, though I wouldn't say people tend to think of it as scary nowadays. What about emotional? Good drama is often cited as the reason the 2005 reboot of the show was able to take off, until everyone started calling it a melodrama. Or conceptual. Each episode an exploration of the dystopian futures that could await us if we're not careful, like Black Mirror.
See that there? That's the Great Atlantic Smog Storm. It's been going 20 years. We get news flashes telling us when it's safe to breathe outside.
So the population just sits there?
Unless that's a little too depressing. Alternatively, should it be a comedy? Enjoyment first, plot second. Because fun is all that matters. Except that everyone complains when episodes like that come out. Truthfully, its goal seems to change with every episode. It is what I like to refer to as a sandbox show, because from a writing standpoint, it is a playground. It can be one thing one episode,
When I close my eyes, I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count.
and then something entirely different the next. Doctor Who isn't tied down to a regular cast, setting, theme, or even genre. It just does whatever the fuck it wants. And you gotta respect that. That being said, the show has had its fair share of different eras, and each era has different priorities, like a new coat of paint. Some eras are more silly, some are more serious, some are more what the fuck did I just watch?
Come on, you must take the load. You must.
The one constant is change. With this in mind, let's return to the first question. Is cheesiness a good thing in Doctor Who? Honest answer, it depends on the episode and what that episode's goals are. Sometimes it can be. You look at something like The End of the World and it leans into its campiness really effectively. It's not my favorite episode of the show ever, but it is undeniably very fun.
Let us mourn her with a traditional ballad.
I think the reason why the cheesiness works here is because it matches the tone that the episode is trying to convey, absurdism. Other times I think the cheesiness can be a problem, and the snippet from New Earth I played earlier is an example of that. Another episode that features Cassandra, look at that. I think what's important here is that the actual emotion the scene was trying to touch on, i.e. making the audience scared of the threat pursuing the Doctor and Rose, does not come through owing to the poor execution. I think the argument that audiences inherently like cheesiness within Doctor Who really gets disproven by the fact that just about all of Doctor Who's top-rated episodes are not cheesy episodes, and most of its lowest-rated episodes are. You wouldn't say that one of Doctor Who's psychological horror episodes, like Midnight, would be better if it was goofier, or at least I hope you wouldn't. The same logic applies to Doctor Who's spin-offs, even the ones shooting for different age demographics. One of the most critically acclaimed pieces of Doctor Who media ever released is Torchwood Children of Earth, which is an extremely dark miniseries detailing an alien invasion that targets children. Children of Earth stands in stark contrast with early Torchwood seasons in terms of its directing and editing. It's vastly less cheesy, and yet everyone likes it more. It's also one of the darkest pieces of Doctor Who media ever released. Deformed Captain Jack Harkness jump scare. Children of Earth again proves that Doctor Who has more pull than just goofy camp. Even where its spin-off shows are concerned, there are other things that audiences are looking for here. Even with that being said, I still enjoy camp.
Travel halfway across the universe for the greatest sex. You still end up dying alone.
But I also think there's an important distinction to be made between camp and cringe. What's the difference? Well, where Doctor Who is concerned, I would define camp as anything absurd, over the top, or cheap looking that the show can be very self-aware of. And this can be greatly enjoyable.
There are three important, brilliant, and complicated reasons why you should listen to me. 1.
Cringe, on the other hand, is when the show sets out to do something and completely fails at it. Take something like The Lie of the Land. Extremely in-your-face political commentary that makes 1984 look subtle by comparison.
Everything they told us, all that we believe now, is a lie.
Check. First-year film student editing that thinks it's being really deep. Check. Extremely forced humor. Check-a-rooney. This episode may be camp, but it's also cringe. And cringe is not good. Cringe is bad. Remember this distinction because it will be on the test. And on that note, let's move on to question 2. Does Doctor Who require logical consistency in its writing? To be fair, this is a question that extends far beyond Doctor Who. The fandom most wrapped up in this question as of now is Star Wars. The worst fandom. Things really heated up with The Last Jedi in 2017, a movie that many people accused of being untrue to the original characters and destructive of the greater Star Wars lore, whereas its defenders say that it doesn't matter if it's inconsistent with what came before because the movie's themes are more important. However, today, The Last Jedi is just the tip of the iceberg in the greater Star Wars schism. The best example I can think of that illustrates the two opposing viewpoints is the work of Dave Filoni.
Dave Filoni and I once had this argument that educated me greatly because I was all concerned. There was this thing I was recording as Darth Maul for this audiobook, and it wasn't, strictly speaking, consistent with something that we did in Clone Wars.
Right.
And I said, Dave, what should I do? Should I tell them to change the line? Should I blah, blah? What do you think? How do I solve this problem? And he just said, Sam, it's good if the stories are different. Well, what do you mean? It has to be consistent. He's like, no, it doesn't. These are all tall tales, and they all of the tellings. It's great if it's a little bit different. That's reason to go seek that out, to get a different perspective on the same story. This campfire that night that was told that story, this happened and Ahsoka's lightsaber was blue, but over here you heard the same story and Ahsoka's lightsaber was green, and that's good. And when I thought about what he said, I'm like, he's right, and that's always been the way it was with George.
Dave Filoni values the viewing experience of his shows more than he does their logical consistency. If he wants to do something, he kind of just does it regardless of whether it actually fits into the greater Star Wars timeline. In this sense, he's able to avoid constraints and tell whatever story he wants to tell. Random example, Filoni evidently liked the fight scene between Obi-Wan and General Grievous in Revenge of the Sith, so when he started working on the Clone Wars, he added in more fight scenes between them, except that the Clone Wars takes place before Revenge of the Sith in the timeline, and it was evident in that movie that this was their first ever duel. He even went as far as to add references to the fight, which hadn't happened yet.
Hello there.
Hello there.
General Grievous is not the kind of dude that would have just said that. But on the flip side, by ignoring continuity, he managed to give us a bunch of cool fight scenes. Many consider him to be one of the best Star Wars writers there's been, but as you can probably imagine, he also has a lot of passionate detractors. Hey, what's up? It's Future Verdana taking over for a second. Now, in the original version of this video, I presented a binary between two sides that I labeled realists and formalists, the implication being that one side values logic more and one side values theme more. But in the months since posting this, I've come to see that this is kind of a massive oversimplification. Because truth be told, both sides value themes and characters above all else. After all, that's the core of a story. You won't find many people who claim that themes aren't important, and if you do, they might be one of the showrunners of Game of Thrones, and you should probably just discount their opinion. The realists, as I labeled them, don't think that logic is more important than themes and characters, but rather that a story lacking in logic will be less effective in these departments, since viewers won't be able to get absorbed into a nonsensical story. In that sense, logic is a vehicle for theme. Now, that's not to say that the formalists, as I've labeled them, are always wrong, because truth be told, there are stories out there that do not require verisimilitude. What do I mean by that? Well, let's scrap this old binary and replace it with a spectrum. The verisimilitude spectrum. Now, verisimilitude in fiction is essentially believability. Stories with verisimilitude have consistent internal logic, believable characters, and a progression of events that always follows what came before logically. It doesn't matter how fantastical the setting is, the story could take place
In a world filled with mirth and magic.
The story still needs to seem believable, in accordance with the rules set down by the author. And if truth be told, the vast majority of literature and media, in my opinion, require this, putting them on the left side of the spectrum. But there are still some exceptions. Think Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a comedy that makes no sense and is better for it.
Come back here and take what's coming to you!
Same goes for most parody and satire. The whole point of it is to mock existing tropes by drawing attention to their absurdity. So if it wasn't absurd, it wouldn't be as effective. The circumvention of verisimilitude can be very effective in service of comedy, but as those like David Lynch have shown us, movies and shows that make no goddamn sense can also be effective in the dramatic department. This is surrealism, and its goal is to make an audience feel as if they're out of their comfort zone. A good way to do that is by breaking conventional writing rules and crafting a story that feels alien. Then there are plenty of movies and shows that blur the line between these two extremes, a great example being Donald Glover's Atlanta, a show that drops rational and sympathetic characters into an over-the-top parody of the real world. Or in other words, if you're gonna circumvent verisimilitude, it needs to fit the tone of the given media, and it needs to have some intent behind it, or else it's just gonna feel lazy. So let's talk about Doctor Who again. Remember that show? Where does it fall onto the spectrum? Well, if it wasn't already obvious, I believe that Doctor Who, like most fiction, requires some amount of verisimilitude in its writing, and I don't think it should get a free pass for all poor execution or bad logic simply because of its campiness. Like most sci-fi, Doctor Who is free to come up with its own rules, but it still needs to follow those rules. And the same is true of most sci-fi and fantasy, including Star Wars. It doesn't matter that it's a fantastical space opera for kids with magic wizards fighting each other with the power of their mind, the world still has a clearly established set of rules. If characters started having duels on the surface of the sun without burning to death somehow and it was never explained, that might be pushing it a little. And I feel the same way about inconsistencies within the greater Star Wars universe. Dave Filoni's written a lot of great stuff, but I don't think the contradictions in his work really help it. You have to remember that millions of people are really invested in these fictional worlds, studying every last detail, every last frame. And if it feels like the creator isn't putting in the effort to actually keep track of what came before, why should the audience? In my mind, all inconsistencies will do is scare the audience off from actually paying attention to every last detail you present them. After all, if they notice something didn't seem right earlier but it didn't end up leading anywhere, why should they assume it will lead somewhere the next time? Which may cause them to miss out on intentional subtext that you actually want them to pick up on. What if the writers wanted to change a character's lightsaber as a representation of their changing personality? Viewers who might otherwise have caught on to this visual metaphor might now now just think it was another mistake, kind of hampering the writer's ability to visually convey the themes they wanted to convey. And the honest truth is that this writing ideology has taken root in Doctor Who. I'll give an example. In Series 12, Chris Chibnall completely retconned the show, establishing that the Doctor had lived countlessly more lives than we knew about before regenerating into the first Doctor and having his memory wiped. This is known as the Timeless Child retcon. In episode 5, we meet one of these secret pre-Hartnell regenerations, known as the Fugitive Doctor, and we see her TARDIS. It's the same old recognizable blue police box we all know and love, and it sure does make for a shocking moment when the 13th Doctor uncovers it.
What is this? Let me take it from the top. Hello, I'm the Doctor.
What a cool twist, with only one slight problem. It doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the most surface-level pieces of knowledge that anyone could possibly know about Doctor Who is why the TARDIS looks the way that it does. It's referenced constantly.
What's with the police box? Why does it look like that?
It's a cloaking device.
The TARDIS is meant to disguise itself wherever it lands. But I landed in the 1960s. It disguised itself as a police box and the circuit got stuck.
The Doctor stole a broken TARDIS from Gallifrey, landed it in a London junkyard in the 1960s. It assumed the form of a police box to blend in, the chameleon circuit broke, and when he took off, it retained that shape forevermore.
It's still a police box. Why hasn't it changed?
This is something that practically every Doctor Who fan or even casual viewer should know. And this of course begs the question, if the Fugitive Doctor comes before the first Doctor in the timeline, why does her TARDIS look like this? In fact, she shouldn't even have the same TARDIS at all. She hadn't stolen it yet. For this to make any sense, you not only have to turn off your brain, but you have to actively fight against your basic knowledge of the show. Personally, I think I can safely say that this is bad writing on purely logical grounds, regardless of what you think of this retcon thematically. Doctor Who's lore at this point is fundamentally broken, something even the most diehard fans can admit, and I think that's a shame. As for people saying the show is so big there's no way it could possibly have a coherent lore, I don't really agree with that. In terms of New Who at least, we've never really had a showrunner that tried to keep things coherent. Funny enough, one of my least favorite eras of the show, John Nathan Turner's, actually did a pretty good job keeping consistency between different Doctors and seasons. It felt like there was an unfolding story that built on what came before without contradicting it. And I like that. Turner held true to things that the show had established 20 years ago, and as opposed to feeling like a hindrance, keeping continuity actually gave the writers opportunities to continue these pre-existing stories in ways that felt natural.
Here, just take a peek at this.
1986? Oh no, and I thought we'd be able to get home.
Your planet survived the attack.
When did it happen?
1986.
Next year? That's almost now.
But forget about continuity for a second. What I really don't get is people who argue that episodes don't even have to have functioning internal logic, like as if plot holes or contrivances don't take away from the story in any way. If Doctor Who were Monty Python, I'd understand the argument, but the writers clearly want us to take many parts of these stories seriously. Is this a goofy show? Yes. But it's difficult to actually become invested in a story that contradicts itself. I've always felt that a large portion of Doctor Who has a lot in common with the mystery genre. At the beginning of an episode, audiences will be presented with clues, and at the end of the episode, the Doctor will put all of those clues together in a satisfying way. This works a lot better when it feels like the clues actually fall into place naturally, as opposed to the writer just pulling random shit out of their ass. So that's my criteria for judging the show. We can finally move on to the 60th anniversary specials. Thank fuck. I think it's time we look through them in detail and try to gather whether they were the show's salvation or if history's doomed to repeat itself. After that, we'll take a peek behind the scenes to see how the show got to this point. So, without any further ado, it can be difficult to judge The Star Beast objectively as an episode since it marks such a big transition for Doctor Who as a whole, the de-Chibnallization of the show. It juggles that with being a potential jumping on point for new viewers via Disney+, and the reintroduction of old fan-favorite characters like Donna Noble, who had her memory wiped at the end of Series 4 to save her life.
No, please, no, 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 no!
There's a lot to talk about, so Let's just start at the beginning. The Star Beast opens with a somewhat awkward recap of Series 4, voiced by David Tennant as he floats in space.
Once upon a time, Lord, I had a best friend. Donna saved the entire universe by taking the power of the Time Lords into her mind. She had to forget everything she ever knew, because if Donna ever remembers me, she will die.
This opening is so stilted and awkward that the director of the episode was quick to disown it on Twitter. Good sign. So then the episode actually starts, and for the first time we see the 14th Doctor exit his TARDIS. Not including that one children in need special that was a thing. And personally, I found this scene to be a little jarring, considering the last we saw of the 14th Doctor was complete and utter confusion and bewilderment as to why his face came back.
What? What? But now this face has come back. Why?
I found it a bit odd how jovial and comfortable he seemed at the beginning of this story. Even if the implication was supposed to be that he's been traveling for some time before this episode takes place, just imagine this from the perspective of someone binging through the show. They wouldn't watch the Children in Need special, they'd go straight from the Power of the Doctor into this, and it just wouldn't flow very well. Oh, and this isn't related to anything, but if you take out the happy music from this scene, it looks like the Doctor is extremely drunk. So after sauntering around, he runs into Donna, and it's here we get our first good joke of the episode.
Thank you very much. Oi!
We learn that Donna now has a daughter named Rose, because even after all these years, Russell T Davies still cannot resist referencing Rose at any possible opportunity.
Rose! Rose!
What?
Rose!
Rose is also trans, which factors heavily into this episode's story, but we'll just put a pin in that for now. Throughout the episode, we learn what's happened to Donna over the years, and how her subconscious has tried to fill the gap left by the Doctor in her life.
Sometimes I think there's something missing. Like I had something lovely, and it's gone.
While this is happening, an adorable alien named the Meep seemingly crashes on Earth and presents itself to Rose.
Please be my friend.
Anyone familiar with Doctor Who comics will recognize this as Beep the Meep. Yes, that is its name. It's one of those characters that falls under the cute, adorable, mysterious creature that turns out to be evil or extremely dangerous trope. The Meep we see in this episode is no exception, as it's revealed to be evil in a shocking twist.
Now to hell with this!
Meaning the Doctor and Donna must work together to stop the Meep from destroying London.
The whole of London town burnt as fuel.
But that's 9 million people.
They did a great job bringing Beep the Meep to the big screen, cuteness and all.
Your brains came up with the Meep.
I'm glad that the Meep was well received and not overshadowed by any mass media controversies.
Are you he or she or they?
My chosen pronoun is the definite article.
Fucking pronouns!
Did a Dalek exterminate all common sense from the new series of Doctor Who?
Before we get into anything else, let's just talk about the positives, because there are things to like here. For the first time in a while, the dialogue feels natural and conveys information about the characters without feeling forced. I think we all remember that one of the things the Chibnall era got criticized for the most was wooden and unnatural dialogue.
I do not want this baby. I can't be a dad.
Hey, starting now. You're gonna give him life. You're gonna bring a person into being. Mate, that is epic.
The humor could also be quite off.
The Wi-Fi's gone off.
Everything's gone off. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, it's all down.
Not even Netflix.
What do we do? Suppose we'll have to have a conversation?
What?
Luckily, this episode doesn't have those same issues, since, if we're being honest, Russell has always excelled with dialogue.
You have a kid, and then she grows up into this extraordinary, beautiful thing, and you think, how lucky am I? Don't you, Mum? Oh!
I think some of what makes this episode feel more natural than a Chibnall one is the blocking. Blocking is how characters move around a scene, and in this episode it feels very natural. Characters talk as they do stuff. A common issue with Chibnall scenes, for me at least, is that characters don't really move around, they just kind of stand in formation as they chit-chat, and it makes everything feel very unnatural. There are noticeable parallels between the sense of humor in The Star Beast and that of Series 1.
You got a cat?
No. Just get strays. They're coming off the estate.
The The special effects and editing are noticeably improved from the Chibnall era, and I think all the actors involved did a splendid job. I think the directing is pretty good as well. Some of the shots in the episode are full-on color coordinated like it's a Wes Anderson flick. Look at all that blueness. However, I'm sorry to say it, but that's kind of where the positives end for me. I feel like this episode really struggles in a few key departments, namely its story. So the Doctor runs into Donna and naturally tries to get away from her because, if you recall, she will die if she remembers him.
Donna took the mind of a Time Lord into her head. I had to wipe her memory to save her life. If she ever remembers me, she will die.
However, once the story really kicks into gear, the Doctor drops any pretense of even trying to be careful around Donna anymore.
You got two hearts. So do I.
You've got what? No, he means it like a metaphor, like two minds, don't you?
This is a sonic screwdriver, and if it's good at one thing, it's resonating concrete.
What are you doing, man? Why is he suddenly so blasé about everything? I'm not bringing this up in an attempt to highlight a plot hole, but rather because I think this is out of character for the Doctor. I can't imagine him putting anyone he cares about as much as Donna in danger just because it's convenient. What's funny is that last time Donna appeared in the Whoniverse, it was under basically the exact same circumstances. It was in The End of Time, the last episode of Russell T Davies' first era. And in that episode, Donna is so sensitive to being reminded of the Doctor and everything she saw on her travels that she has to be effectively shielded from any potentially triggering stimuli. I suppose a long passage of time has occurred, but seeing the Doctor exercise literally zero caution around her until the end of the episode when he suddenly starts caring again.
Let me help.
No, you can't get involved.
Doesn't really sit right. It feels like the Doctor is only acting like this because the plot needs him to, not necessarily because it's what he would actually do. That kind of leads me to a bigger point I wanted to make about this episode. Things just kind of happen, and the plot ends up feeling a little arbitrary. Apparently the Doctor can do this with his screwdriver now. When did he have time to install these upgrades? It's implied that not a whole lot of time has passed since he regenerated.
That's his Grand Mistress.
Catch up.
So why has he never used this extremely overpowered ability before, or for that matter, again after this? Good question. That's what I was trying to get at earlier. Doctor Who's a show where you can do pretty much anything. The explanations for how the Doctor can do what he does are all bullshit, but it's still important that they're there so that it feels like there's some kind of limit on what he can actually do, because if it seems like the Doctor has unlimited power to do literally whatever at any given moment just because the writer decided it would be convenient, it's hard for an audience to get invested in the story. And if there's any part of this episode that really suffers from this contrived writing, it's the ending. So the Doctor is on this spaceship trying to abort its launch because it will destroy all of London, and when he's in the middle of his work, this glass divider comes down, separating him from a lot of the controls he needs to dingle-dangle. So naturally, he tries dictating to Donna what buttons he needs to press.
Let me help.
Switches, the top ones, the blue ones, stick them all down.
But then he kind of gives up on that and decides instead to unleash the Time Lord energy inside of her so that she can save the day at the cost of her life.
Because you and I can stop this shit, but it will kill you.
Okay.
Tornado.
150.
Cliff tops. Burrow. Dance. Mexico.
And so she uses her Time Lord knowledge to abort the launch, but then she dies. But it turns out Donna is actually fine. What? You're not dead. Because she had a child, which split the power of the meta-crisis between them.
Too much power for one person, but you had a child, and the meta-crisis passed down.
Closing down all psychedelic lightwave emanators and transferring excess power to the broken dome prefixolators.
So the day is saved and the Meep is defeated. Donna and her daughter then simply expel the meta-crisis energy from their bodies because I guess they can do that. If I'm being honest, I have a lot of issues with this scene, but I'll just boil it down to these 4. Issue 1. The circumstances under which the Doctor has to kill Donna in order to save London feel a little contrived. Keep in mind, this is the Doctor making the decision to sacrifice his own best friend for the greater good. As a viewer, I don't think the episode did a good enough job explaining why the Doctor can't just simply keep dictating to Donna what buttons she needs to press, especially since they still have a few minutes left on the countdown, and ultimately immediately it seems like Donna only needs to mess with a few controls.
I will triple drive the particle manifesto, overstep the umbilical feed, shutter fry the positrons. Yes!
3, 2.
It seems unlikely to me to suggest that Donna really wouldn't have had enough time to do that, especially since right after the Doctor declares that they've run out of time, they have a 3-minute conversation before Donna even touches any of the controls.
We've run out of time.
Oh, I'll show you destruction, mate.
Maybe you can make the argument that Donna is just so incompetent that she wouldn't have been able to do this in time. We'll never know. But the fact that the Doctor doesn't even try feels odd to me. It made it more difficult for this scene to affect me emotionally when I found myself wondering why the Doctor is sacrificing Donna when there seems to be a much more obvious solution he's not even trying.
Why does it have to be this?
I don't know, Doctor. Why does it have to be this? And this is an easy fix. You could just have there be far less time left on the countdown. Though I think there's a better way to rewrite this scene. Just move the part where the glass divider comes down to a little later in the scene after the Doctor's told Donna that if she gets involved, it'll kill her. And make it so that when it comes down, it's also noise cancelling, meaning they can no longer hear each other. Then we could get a really heartwarming silent moment where, when the Doctor's freaking out, knowing what has to be done, Donna just puts her hand on the glass to let him know it's okay. She gives her consent. Then he could put his hand on the glass and they could just have a moment together before he summons forth some regeneration energy and transfers it into her. Look, call it sappy all you want. This show was made to be sappy. Shut up. I like this not only because it conveys all the emotions of the scene non-verbally, but because it mirrors Donna and the Doctor's reintroduction at the beginning of season 4 when they were separated by glass and couldn't hear each other. Except where it was comedic there, it would be tragic here. At the very least, I think it would work better than the Doctor reactivating Donna like she's the Winter Soldier, which was never really set up.
Westerly. Pelican.
It's a small change, but I think it would go a long way. Issue 2. It's kind of a rehash of a scene we already saw in The End of Time, after an entire episode of the audience being told Donna will die if she remembers the Doctor.
Just go to her now, go on, just run across the street, go up and say hello.
If she ever remembers me, her mind will burn and she will die.
She does remember him, and she has a different fake-out death.
What did I...
Donna? What was that? Donna? Donna, are you there?
There it was revealed to the audience that the Doctor, at some point off-screen, installed a defense mechanism in Donna which protects her in the event of her remembering him.
Do you think I'd leave my best friend without a defense mechanism? She's all right, she's fine, promise. She'll just sleep.
So, if the Doctor knew that Donna wasn't actually in any danger, why did he keep telling everyone that she would die if she remembered him? The answer is somewhere in Russell T Davies' head, but it never made it into the script. The point I'm trying to get at is that this defense mechanism is never acknowledged in the Star Beast, and I found myself wondering, does it only work once, or is Donna actually not in any danger? The Doctor's already lied about this once, so why should I trust him now?
If she ever remembers me, she will die.
She will die. She will die.
What happened?
She's all right, she's fine, promise.
Like, was it really necessary to bait us with another Donna's dead fake out? Moral of the story, don't copy The End of Time, because that episode is a perfect example of when camp becomes cringe. Issue 3. I think the reveal that Rose is a product of the meta-crisis is mishandled. And believe me, I like the idea on its face, but I don't think it's executed well. For starters, it just comes out of nowhere.
The shed was her memory of the TARDIS. Every creature we met, she remembered as a toy.
Exterminate!
Upgrade in progress.
These toys that the episode points to as examples of her repressed memories only show up for the first time in the climax, depriving the audience of having any chance of piecing this together for themselves. Imagine how much more satisfying this could have felt if it had been woven into the story all along. If there had been little moments when Rose seemed to act like the Doctor, or we'd caught some glimpses of these toys that looked like Cybermen, then it would have felt like all these clues fell into place during the climax, and audience members would have been like, oh, I see it now.
It was always there.
But Russell didn't do this because he just wanted the moment to be shocking and didn't want there to be any chance audience members would predict it, which makes it feel random and unearned when it's established. But that's far from being the clunkiest thing about this reveal. And before I get into what I'm about to say, I'm sure Russell had the best of intentions when writing this. I'm sure he was just trying to shine a light onto trans issues, something that he clearly feels very passionately about. But there's a heavy implication that the reason Rose identifies as trans is because of the meta-crisis energy inside her. In this episode's most cringeworthy moment, we flash between Donna saying binary and Rose saying non-binary.
Binary. Non-binary. Binary.
And apparently, because the Doctor is neither male nor female, and the Doctor was inside Rose,
That's what she said!
that made Rose neither male nor female.
We are binary.
She's not, because the Doctor's male and female.
And neither. And more.
Okay, wait. Doesn't it kind of cheapen the whole trans representation to imply that the only reason this character is trans is because of timey-wimey sci-fi shit? I don't think the best representation for a minority group is when they're only there to be a plot device.
It becomes a vital part of the plot that Rose contains the he and the she and the neither and the both.
I myself am not trans, obviously, though neither was the person who wrote this. But there is just something odd to me about adding a trans character into your narrative, specifically because, in your view, trans people contain the he and the she, even though it was never made clear at any point before this that Rose identified as non-binary and it seemed like she just wanted to be seen as a woman. And for the sake of being generous, maybe this isn't what Russell meant. Maybe the idea is that the meta-crisis is supposed to be a metaphor for being trans, and it didn't influence Rose's identity at all, but rather the other way around. But even if this was his intention, the way he wrote it kind of accidentally ends up implying that this is not the case.
We are binary.
She's not, because the Doctor's male and female.
The episode somehow gets even clunkier after this when, shortly before dispelling their meta-crisis energy, Rose and Donna say this to the Doctor.
We've got all that power, but there is a way to get rid of it. Something a male-presenting Time Lord will never understand.
Okay, so again, I'm sure Russell was trying to be progressive here by inserting a feminist moment, but he inadvertently ends up pushing an ideology of gender essentialism, and it's especially jarring to say someone is incapable of something because of the body they currently inhabit in an episode that's supposed to be pro-trans. Apparently the Doctor doesn't have the emotional intelligence to know that you can just get rid of Time Lord abilities at will because he currently identifies as a man. I mean, he was a woman an hour ago. Does having a penis just disqualify you?
It's a shame you're not a woman anymore, because she'd have understood.
Issue 4. There's a serious lack of stakes or consequences at the end of this episode for anything. Like, there's an entire sequence showing the Meep destroying London, but then the Doctor and Donna flip a few switches and the ground just fixes itself, which is a bit cheap, but not nearly as cheap as when Donna just gets all of her memories back without any complications. Now, this might just be me speaking, but the ending of Series 4, when Donna had to have her memory wiped, was the perfect conclusion for her character arc, as well as being the perfect thematic conclusion to a tragedy. The confidence Donna had slowly been building up throughout the season, her pride and joy, ultimately ends up being her undoing, and she has to give it all up to save the world.
Donna, I was just going.
Yeah, see ya. I'll tell you what though, you're wasting your time with that one.
I just want you to know that there are worlds out there, safe in the sky because of her. They will never forget her. Well, she can never remember.
But no matter what became of her, the Doctor would never forget her or what she did. Is this sad? Yes, but it was a very effective piece of writing, which, in my opinion, is now less effective because Russell really wanted to go back and give everything a happy ending. The fact that Donna was a human Time Lord metacrisis seemed like an unsolvable issue back in 2008.
There's never been a human Time Lord metacrisis before now. And you know why?
Because there can't be.
Oh, Donna Noble, I am so sorry.
But now, in this episode, it's actually so solvable that Donna and Rose imply that the Doctor's an idiot for even thinking that it was a problem. And kind of by extension, the audience.
We've still got to fix you two. That thing is wrapped around your cortex.
There is a way to get rid of it.
Just let it go.
You see what I mean by lack of stakes? Or logic? You guys don't get it. All things are possible when you have girl power. This episode, perhaps a little lacking in verisimilitude for my tastes. Also, I'm just gonna be petty and throw it out there that canonically Rose's age doesn't make any sense. This episode is set in 2023 and she's stated to be 15.
Rose is a 15-year-old girl.
And yet the last time we saw Donna was canonically in the spring of 2010 and she didn't have a kid yet. In fact, she wasn't even pregnant. So for her to have a 15-year-old daughter in 2023, something ain't adding up here, Chief.
Sack Russell T. Davies.
We also get to see a new TARDIS interior in this episode.
This is amazing!
I don't have any strong thoughts on it really, apart from the fact that this is undeniably the most Teletubbies the TARDIS has ever looked. Take that as you will. All in all, though it had its moments, The Star Beast is a deeply flawed episode that doesn't do the best job of kicking off Doctor Who's 60th birthday. Will the next special fare better? Let's find out. We are now jumping from my least favorite special of the lot to my favorite, because Wild Blue Yonder is kind of a banger. This is the episode that convinced me that, under the right circumstances, Russell still has it in him. It is a genuinely good time from start to finish. There are no contrivances, no retcons, no lore dumps. Mostly.
I saw it. The flux.
No, nothing other than pure, uncut Doctor Who wackiness.
How many knees?
2.
2 in total? Or 2 on each leg?
The setting of this episode is a remote spaceship at the edge of reality itself. The spaceship seems to be completely abandoned apart from a suspiciously slow robot.
Stay there, Jimbo. No sudden moves.
And can I just say, I've always loved Who episodes that take place in a quiet, abandoned location, now completely deserted. It gives the episode a slightly eerie, melancholy feel, especially when the writers feed us little tidbits about what caused its downfall.
Those are the colonists.
The colonists aren't here yet. This is the setup team. The skeleton crew.
Why did they...
I also think this setting makes for an especially good mystery. Why is there nobody here? And this episode takes full advantage of its mysterious setting. The entire episode essentially revolves around the Doctor and Donna slowly learning more about the base they've crash-landed in, why it's empty, and how this information can help them defeat the Not Things. Yes, this episode complements its mysterious setting with even more mysterious antagonists.
Joel.
The Not Things do not originate from our universe.
Did you come from outside?
We came from the nothing.
We are not things.
All they know of our world is what they can observe, and so they try to copy it, to limited success.
The arms are so very difficult.
So we have an abandoned space station, a fake Doctor, a fake Donna, and a mysterious lack of crew members. I mean, there's potential for action, hijinks, fake-outs, and a compelling mystery at the heart of it all. And does this episode deliver on its potential? Honestly, yes. Yes, it does. This episode was unapologetically weird and stands out from the rest of the specials like a sore thumb, and I love it for that. After all, being weird and fantastical is what sets Doctor Who apart from other sci-fis, so in my opinion, it should own it. Everything I would have wanted to see from this setting is realized, especially the fake-outs. The episode really milks that.
Doctor, come back! She's not me! You've got the wrong one!
Russell really takes advantage of the fact that the antagonists look exactly like the protagonists. The best example of this is how they're introduced. It'll take the audience a few minutes to notice that something's off. You see, an episode written by a less competent Doctor Who writer probably would have shown us the Not Things scheming before they ever encountered the Doctor and Donna, thus depriving the audience of their surprise reveal. One thing Chris Chibnall liked to do as head writer a lot was show the villain just sort of farting around before they ever interacted with the Doctor to provide the audience with necessary background information. And whilst I understand why he did that, I think it was kind of a mistake. Take a look at Flux. We follow around the villains of that episode for a while before they even come face to face with the Doctor. But it doesn't really add much to the episode, it just kind of muddles an already overly confused narrative, and sprinkles in some cringe for good measure.
Trick or treat, Doctor.
This means that we frequently know more about the villain than the Doctor does upon their first meeting, which means we're not really learning about them as a character through the Doctor's eyes. In this episode, Russell takes a different approach. He only allows the audience to know as much as the Doctor does, so as the Doctor pieces together the mystery, so does the audience, and I think this approach works a lot better, especially in a setting like this, where it can be used to generate real surprise and tension. I also love how the Doctor uses the Not Things lack of knowledge of our world as a weapon against them, especially when he tricks them into thinking superstitions are real in this universe by drawing a line of salt.
In our universe, it is said that vampires, demons, and ghosts cannot cross a line of salt until they've counted every single grain.
You're lying.
Then walk towards me. Stop copying and make your own minds up!
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
This episode is bonkers, and the mystery of what happened to the ship's pilot is at the center of it all. Solving that mystery ends up being key to defeating the Not Things, tying everything together nicely. Long ago, the ship's captain sacrificed herself so that the Not Things wouldn't be able to finish the process of duplicating her. In doing so, she left nothing behind but a robot, and her reasoning for doing so is actually kind of genius. The Not Things are receptive to any observable stimuli or change in their environment, making them extremely difficult to kill, as they'll learn how you think and anticipate your moves before you even make them. So by leaving nothing behind but an incredibly rudimentary and slow robot, and giving it the command to self-destruct the station, the captain was able to outsmart them by leaving her final move in plain sight. After all, they only know how to copy people. They can't account for an inanimate object that hardly ever moves. This is what I think Doctor Who episodes should be: wacky, conceptual, experimental, and at their core, a genuinely interesting mystery.
At the edge of creation.
That's an airlock door that opened 3 years ago and closed.
Throw in a running joke where the Doctor and Donna accidentally pervert human history, changing the word gravity to mavity.
The gravity of the situation!
What was that delightful word? Mavity.
Caught in the gravity field.
Caught in the what?
Mavity field.
And the Doctor's reunion with Wilf after all this time.
Hello, me old soldier.
I never thought I'd see you again.
And you have yourself a truly peak episode. And on the topic of Wilf, anyone who's following the development of these specials would be aware that he was originally going to play a larger role, but as fate would have it, he tragically passed away after only filming this scene, which makes it one of the most haunting but also touching scenes in all of the specials.
We wanted to do more, because we love him. He wasn't well enough to do more, but that one scene he completed fills me with absolute joy. It's pure Bernard. I am so glad we got to shoot that, because it's one of the great joys of my entire life that I got to work with that man. I love him.
And on the topic of revisions, this episode seems to have been heavily altered from its original state. Just from a glance at the original version of the script, back when it was titled The Bridge, we can see that there was a scene near the opening, likely of the Doctor and Donna in the TARDIS, that was later cut. And I think that was for the best, because that would have really bogged down the pacing. In fact, this script is the only one of the 4 that I would say truly feels polished. Now, even after dishing out all of this praise, I must admit, this episode still isn't perfect. Some of the logic is a tad convenient, and the VFX does struggle to keep up in places.
Auntie Iris, Mummy and Daddy, why does he travel with someone as stupid as you?
I think there's a big missed opportunity in this episode's narrative, that being that this should have been where the TARDIS got its new interior, not at the end of the last episode. Personally, I found it a bit weird when the TARDIS just changed spontaneously at the end of the Star Beast. I know that it's become a tradition for every new Doctor to have a new TARDIS.
Oh, you sexy thing.
But in universe, there's no actual reason provided for why it changed. Especially if we're supposed to believe that the 14th Doctor has been traveling around for a little bit before the episode takes place, which I'm still kind of unclear on. Every time the TARDIS has gotten a new interior in the past, it was because it was destroyed. And the TARDIS being destroyed is a key part of this episode's story. I think it would have worked really well if, at the end of the episode, when the Doctor and Donna are reunited with the TARDIS, it's rebuilt itself. Because as it's currently written, it feels like the TARDIS only changes because it's self-aware that there's a new showrunner in town. Dare I say it, but I think this is one case where Chibnall actually did it better. At the beginning of his era, the TARDIS is destroyed in the most epic fashion yet, and the Doctor is separated from it for 2 whole episodes before eventually being reunited with it, which really draws out a viewer's anticipation and makes the reveal feel bigger and more meaningful. Yes, I did just use something Chibnall wrote for Doctor Who as an example of something I like. Don't get used to it. On the topic of Chibnall, I'm also really not a fan of how this episode doubles down on the timeless child retcon. I think everyone was kind of hoping RTD would ignore it, like how everyone ignored the movie's retcon that made the Doctor half human. Even Chibnall said that he expected RTD to ignore it, but he didn't.
You don't know where you're from.
How do you know that?
The positive aspect of these scenes is that, at the very least, they add some much-needed emotional weight to certain Chibnall plotlines like the Flux. If you watched Series 13, firstly, my condolences, but secondly, you'll remember that the Doctor accidentally set a chain of events in motion that destroyed, like, half of the entire known universe. It was called the Flux, and to a large extent it was the Doctor's fault.
The flux wasn't an accident. It wasn't a naturally occurring event. It was made. It was placed. Because of you.
And yet, she seemed surprisingly unfazed by this fact. You'd think something like this would bear massive emotional consequences for someone as self-conscious as the Doctor. I mean, you all remember how long it took him to get over the Time War, and that was less people dying than the Flux. And yet, we barely get any indication that this has affected the Doctor on a deep level. One second we're getting scenes of millions of people getting erased from existence, and the next we're getting the Doctor wisecracking.
Our savior.
I always wondered what time would look like. Huh. Way to play to your ego. Nice look. I fancy that coat. Oh, I get how that ego appeal thing works now.
It would be one thing if we saw how this actually affected the Doctor, and there was some implication that this humor was just a way of deflecting the trauma, but that's not really in there. The last few scenes of Flux have such a happy-go-lucky, chummy tone to them, you wouldn't think that half the universe just got erased. I guess someone didn't grasp the mavity of the situation. There was a brief scene of emotional reflection at the end, but it doesn't have to do with the Flux, but rather the Doctor contemplating her past and whether or not she should try to find out more about it.
I was looking for information about me.
It's nice to see RTD actually trying to retroactively fix certain mistakes Chibnall made by showing how the Flux impacted the Doctor emotionally.
It destroyed half the universe because of me.
So yes, I keep running. Of course I do. How am I supposed to look back on that? It wasn't your fault. I know!
But at the same time, personally, I think the best approach to dealing with the aftermath of Chibnall era plotlines is to just retcon them out of existence. But that's just me. Now, this episode was intentionally kept secret before transmission. Clips of it in the trailers and cast lists had a redacted text pasted over them, leading a lot of people to think that it was going to feature previous Doctors or companions, and I think a lot of people ended up being disappointed that it didn't.
I think everyone's expecting Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi and the ghost of William Hartnell riding on the back of the Garm. They arrive on a spaceship and they meet evil versions of themselves. That's it. That's it. This is so simple. That's why I kept it secret, but I wonder if that's had an unfortunate effect and made it disappointingly simple on its broadcast.
And that's a shame, because on its own merit, this is a pretty good episode. I would argue the best of the 4. This episode wasn't trying to do anything big or transformative. The episode preoccupied with that is the Giggle. The Giggle, the Giggle, the Giggle, the Giggle. It's the triumphant return of the celestial toy maker, and it seems to be most people's favorite of the 4 specials. And to that I say, welcome to the hot take portion of this video, because I think the Giggle is a little overrated. I can't deny it has some extremely fun moments, and casting Neil Patrick Harris as the toy maker, making him do over-exaggerated accents and giving him a dance sequence was a stroke of genius. But again, I think the script comes up a bit lacking. The plot of the episode is essentially just that the toy maker wants to mess with the Doctor, and he does that by messing with humanity, of course, by making them all go insane.
Everyone started thinking they're right. All the time. If you try to argue, they go mad.
But actually, the insanity was inside us all along.
But it's not only the giggle. Don't go thinking you've got an excuse. All the anger out there on the street, the lies, the righteousness, that's human, that's you.
The script is stuffed with ideas from start to finish. What if everybody on Earth thought they were right all the time? What if the first ever TV broadcast was actually an encoded message planted by the toy maker? What if the toy maker could create pocket realms within our world that don't abide by the laws of physics? What if Mel from Trial of a Time Lord came back to Earth and got a job at UNIT? What if the Doctor could duplicate himself into two doctors, for some reason, and then duplicate the TARDIS as well? What if... dance sequence. And what if there was a robot sidekick at UNIT now?
An invention of the Flinks.
Hello, the Flinks.
This is all one episode? I've always thought the best Doctor Who episodes are the ones that really hone in on one idea and stick with it. Like Blink, Heaven Sent, Vincent and the Doctor, Midnight. All episodes that explore exactly one idea to its maximum potential. And the results speak for themselves. The unfortunate result of cramming this many ideas into a single episode is that there simply isn't enough time to give everything a satisfactory explanation. Like, how is Mel here? The last time we saw her was in a completely different part of the universe in the year 2 million, so I guess she must have time traveled to get here.
So I got a lift off a Zingo and came back to Earth.
Oh, she caught a Zingo. Gotcha.
It's the thing you get a lift off.
How old would she even be by now, canonically anyways? Like 100? She says that she traveled with Sabalon Glitz until he died of old age at 101.
He lived till he was 101. What? Died falling over a whiskey bottle.
If they spent their entire lives together and he died at 101 at some point in her past, how is she still this young? Russell, my guy, you gotta keep track of characters' ages because it's getting ridiculous at this point. I would have loved to see an episode that just dealt with Mel's return as a companion. Like, remember School Reunion in Season 2? That episode saw Sarah Jane Smith's return to Doctor Who, and the entire episode was focused around just that. This provided us with all kinds of great moments, like seeing what Sarah Jane had done with her life in the decades since leaving the Doctor.
Well, no harm in a little investigation while I'm here.
No, good for you.
Her reaction to seeing the TARDIS for the first time in decades.
Hello, Sarah Jane.
It's you. You've regenerated.
Yeah, half a dozen times since we last met.
How she had readjusted to life on Earth.
You know what the most difficult thing was? Coping with what happens next, with what doesn't happen next. You took me to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. You showed me supernovas. And then you just dropped me back on Earth. How could anything compare to that?
And how she had changed as a person since we'd last seen her. Conversely, Mel's inclusion in this episode ends up feeling like little more than window dressing. Yeah, you know, Mel, she's here. There she is in the background. She's part of Donna's family, I guess, now.
Oh, your family, darling. Sit down. Hey.
I mean, they're both redheads, so they're probably related. To give this episode the credit it deserves, though, it does fix an issue that was on display in the school reunion, namely the fact that the writers felt it necessary to give Rose and Sarah Jane a stupid cat fight, just further pushing the sexist stereotype that anytime two women meet, they will immediately fight over a man.
Who's she?
Rose, Sarah Jane. Sarah Jane, Rose.
Your assistants are getting younger.
I'm not his assistant. Rats in school.
They dissect them. Or maybe you haven't reached that bit yet.
They haven't done that for years. Where are you from? The Dark Ages?
Anyway.
I saw things you wouldn't believe.
Try me.
Mummies.
I've met ghosts.
Robots. Lots of robots.
Slivine in Downing Street.
Daleks.
Met the Emperor.
He didn't mention me once.
Oh, mate. The missus and the ex. Welcome to every man's worst nightmare.
Seeing Donna and Mel get along is nice.
I wasn't the first redhead.
That was me.
They also made Melanie more of an actual character than she was in the 80s, so props to them for that.
And you can sort of put things a bit right, maybe, because when I was in it in the 80s, I was very sort of Fay Ray going, monsters! You know, didn't really have anything, and I was a computer programmer, which was sort of quite ahead of its time as such. Never went anywhere near anything remotely like a computer. So now I have a desk, and I am in that office, you know, being what I need to be.
I'm not against the idea of an episode that has a lot going on. In fact, I'm all for it, but it's a high-risk, high-reward strategy. If you want to try writing an episode like that, it's vital that no matter how many ideas are shoved into the plot, each one of them gets the opportunity to be fully realized, and unfortunately, in this episode, I can't say they are. I wanted to see more of how the world was functioning when everybody thought they were right. We get a brief glimpse of it, but then it feels like the episode just kind of burns the idea and swiftly moves on from it without ever really mining it for its potential. I would have loved to see how the Giggle affects characters we've come to know based on their specific personalities, not just random extras. The closest the episode comes to showing us this is one single moment where Kate is affected by the Toymaker's transmission.
Busy day? Why do you want to know?
I'm just asking.
It's an invasion of my privacy. In fact, it's an assault on my civic rights.
But it's resolved almost immediately and it doesn't really lead anywhere.
I'm sorry. No, it's okay.
After the 15-minute mark, it might as well not even be happening because it doesn't come up again that everyone on Earth is currently insane. Then they shoot a satellite and that's it. It's resolved.
And fire.
We did it! Success!
And knowing Doctor Who, I have a feeling that this massive apocalyptic event in human history will never be mentioned again. This plotline had so much potential.
What do we do this time, Doctor? How do we fight the human race?
And it just wasn't really used. But the most infamous example of an idea in this episode that many people felt to be half-baked was the bi-generation. So the Doctor gets shot through the chest by the Toymaker.
Play the third game with the next Doctor.
And it looks like he's about to regenerate.
Here we go again.
Until...
How did that happen?
Bi-generation. I have bi-generated.
Now there are two of them.
So a lot of people really didn't like this, which many more defensive fans of Russell T Davies have chalked up to the notion that people just hate things that are new.
Bi-generation, we discover, is an ancient myth of the Time Lords. Actually, I've had this idea for years. I've always wanted the Doctor to talk to his new version. Imagine how much fans love new things and will really rejoice when this happens.
To which I would strongly disagree. As fandoms go, Doctor Who fans are usually quite open to new ideas. And if you don't believe that, look at literally any other fandom. I, like many others, really like the idea of the new Doctor getting to meet the old one to, in a sense, pass the torch. The problem with how it's presented in this episode is that, why did it happen? What caused this thing that's never happened before to any Time Lord ever to just spontaneously happen? And why wasn't it made explicitly clear to the audience?
What? Bi-generation is supposed to be a myth, but look at me.
It kind of feels like the Star Beast all over again, where shit will just happen because the writer says so. And yes, I hear you type in your comments. I know there are a lot of fan theories. Firstly, you could argue that when the Doctor drew that line of salt and wild blue yonder,
I invoked a superstition where the walls are thin and all things are possible.
He summoned myths into reality, and because bi-generation is apparently a myth, that caused him to bi-generate. Alternatively, you could say this happened because the Toymaker was nearby and the laws of physics just go wonky in his presence. Just to be clear, Russell could have intended either of these explanations, but he should have made it clear to the audience, because most people walked away not knowing what happened here. And some people have called this subtle storytelling, but no, it's not. There's a difference between shoving something down your audience's throat and making your story make sense. And it really doesn't help that they state that the 15th Doctor is older than the 14th Doctor.
You're the old man. You're older than me.
He's younger because you came after him.
Which implies that they didn't actually duplicate, but like the 15th Doctor is like from the future, and when the 14th Doctor died at some point, he went back in time to this moment and then became 15? It's just confusing. The idea that the Doctor's physical biology could change because he invoked a superstition is not the kind of thing Doctor Who has trained us to believe, at least not in the past when it was more of a sci-fi, but as we'll come to see, Russell's new era very much so seems to be playing on fantasy logic, or whatever you want to call it. Which again, I'm open to, but the way that the Doctor just takes everything in stride as if nothing abnormal is going on kind of throws everything off.
So good! Yeah, myth, Mel. What do you think?
After an initial moment of shock, he barely even seems surprised that it happened. This is supposed to be an impossible superstition coming into reality. You should be questioning everything right now, Doctor. You little science gremlin.
Magic! Science! Magic! Science, Miss Hawthorne.
That's a big part of why this doesn't work. The beat isn't played right. If the Doctor drawing the line of salt really did break the entire universe and set the stage for everything to come in the following season, it shouldn't have been glossed over nearly as much as it was. The show should have put more focus onto the fact that the Doctor is now dealing with a completely different rule set, and we should have seen him struggle to keep up. Then again, I'm not even clear on whether the salt line actually was supposed to be the explanation behind this. I think it's just as likely that the reason this is supposed to have happened is because the Doctor's extremely damaged right now. The specials go out of their way to repeatedly tell us this.
I got a glimpse inside your mind, and it's like you're staggering. Maybe that's why your old face came back.
I like the idea of the Doctor's adventures taking a toll on him, but couldn't we have seen this through his actions more rather than just being told it directly?
You're thin as a pin, love. You're running on fumes.
This is where I would have liked the storytelling to be subtle, not with a key plot point. And plus, the Doctor's been way more damaged than this in the past, and it never broke his regeneration cycle, but I think any way you shake it, at the end of the day, Russell just wrote this in because he thought it would be cool, and he didn't really take the time to, make it make sense. But it's not just the inexplicable nature of the bi-generation that I take issue with, it's what it's actually used for within the confines of the episode. There is so much potential for a climax with not one, but two Doctors working together to take down someone as powerful as the Toymaker. But what we ended up getting was the Doctors challenging the Toymaker to a game of catch.
Name your challenge, Doctor.
You said it. The ball.
And then they win the game of catch, and that's how they save the day. And it's shockingly anticlimactic.
Not fair.
I'm still confused on how the godlike Toymaker was unable to win a game of catch, but I guess it's been a while since he practiced. Oh, and I noticed while editing this that you can see in a few shots the Doctor already holding the ball before he's supposed to catch it, but you know what? I'll let it slide because I'm merciful. So pretty much no one likes this ending scene except for people who really like watching Ncuti Gatwa jump around without pants on. So presumably Russell T Davies. Given all the buildup and intrigue surrounding the Toymaker, I think most people assumed that in order to defeat him, the Doctor would have to do something clever, trick him in some way. The last time we saw the Toymaker, the Doctor tricked him by imitating his voice so that some sentient board game pieces would move in such a way as to blow up his realm at the exact moment he dematerialized his TARDIS so that he could escape. It's a weird episode. But even there, the Doctor's solution took more thinking than here. Is there a way this ending could be rewritten to involve the themes that the episode actually sets up before this point? I think so. Let's return to the theme of tribalism that the episode kind of juggles and then drops.
All the anger out there on the street. That's human, that's you. Using your intelligence to be stupid.
I think this would be an excellent point to bring that back. So let's rewind a little bit. Remember the scene where they shot down the satellite and freed humanity from the Giggle? Remove that scene. Make it so the Giggle is still in full effect during this climax, adding more tension. Remember how it was set up earlier in the episode that it's possible to disable the inhibitor bracelets, keeping everyone at unit sane? Well, in my version of the scene, the second the Doctor got the ball into his possession, he would have lifted his sonic and disabled the ZDX bracelet before throwing the ball to one of the soldiers. Yes, in my version of the scene, it wouldn't be the Doctors versus the Toymaker, but rather humanity versus the Toymaker, because the second humanity was in possession of the ball, they were never going to give it up. Because of the Toymaker's own actions, every single person at unit would start going crazy trying to win the game. and the ball would pass from person to person to person, eventually working its way through the entire building and down onto the streets below, and the toy maker would never get it back again. And remember, the toy maker can't quit in the middle of a game. As long as the game was still going, he'd be stuck on Earth with the doctors unless he forfeited, meaning the Doctor would have weaponized the toy maker's own plans against him to defeat him. And the theme of human tribalism would have actually played into the climax. But within the episode we actually got, all Russell really used the Giggle for was a means to generate extremely unsubtle political commentary.
They are using this to control us. I am anti-Z-Dex.
Why should I care about you?
No change there, then.
That's the game of the 21st century. They shout, and they type, and they cancel.
Scream after scream after scream.
That's right. Your mom was right about those damn phones all along. They've been making you crazy. Via a secret sound being broadcast into everyone's brains since the dawn of television.
La 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 la.
Another tune.
What are the notes? C-E-G-C, G-E-C.
I found the exact same notes.
That isn't C-E-G-C-G-E-C. It's clearly A-C-F-C-F-E-G. Is Russell tone deaf?
Sack Russell T. Davies.
This isn't even the first time Doctor Who has done this.
Now that one. A perfect fifth.
No, Doctor, that isn't a perfect fifth. It's a perfect fourth. Get writers with better senses of pitch, BBC. This is atypical for Russell, but even the dialogue in this episode can feel at times a bit iffy to me, and the fan service is cranked up to 11. At one point, the 14th and 15th Doctors have an exchange that is literally just lore references.
Put on trial, exiled, key to time, all the devastation of Logopolis, Adric. River Song, Sarah Jane, and Rose. But the Time War, Pandorica, Mavic Chen, the gods of Ragnarok.
Is this dialogue? Can this qualify as dialogue? It sounds more like they've challenged each other to a contest of who can name more Doctor Who trivia.
Bo, the face of Bo!
Oh, and in regards to lore dumps, this episode bedevils its audience with mystery box setups.
There's only one player I didn't dare face. The one who waits.
Who's that?
That's someone else's game.
All of the specials do this, and if I'm being honest, I think the show has become kind of over-reliant on mystery boxes at this point.
Just wait till I tell the boss.
Cryptic. I hate that.
But this episode doesn't just reference past stories or rehash past formulas. It kind of feels like Russell is recycling a lot of material with this one. Something about the Doctor getting shot through the chest by one of his oldest foes and then having a fake-out regeneration that results in him duplicating himself kind of rings a bell. Almost as if I've seen it before.
I'm regenerating.
Oh, also something about one of the Doctor's former companions getting their very own copy of David Tennant to live a quiet life with seems oddly familiar.
I've only got one life. Rose Tyler. I could spend it with you.
I also can't help but feel as if I've already seen an episode in which the bad guy hijacks Earth's satellites and uses them to subliminally mind control everyone on Earth by use of a rhythm that's beamed into all of their heads, without them even knowing it's there.
What's the Archangel network?
I've got Archangel. Everyone's got it.
It's in the phones.
There it is. That rhythm is everywhere. Ticking away in the subconscious.
It's not like the old Archangel network.
Same goes for the Master's remains being recovered by an unknown hand with red painted fingernails. Okay, to be fair, I think that last one might be a reference, but either way, it's still following in line with a very common trend. Even the Toymaker's dance sequence couldn't help but remind me of something else Russell has already written. those examples weren't cherry-picked from across his entire run, they all came from just 2 stories he wrote. It's true that Doctor Who is a humongous show. Inevitably, ideas are going to be reused. I mean, basically every classic Who serial ever was filmed in a quarry, so repetition isn't anything new. That being said, if you're going to rehash an idea you've already done, I would argue it needs some kind of new spin. If you guys recall, I complained about Chibnall copying ideas RTD had already done back in 2020, so the last thing I expected to see upon RTD's return was for him to also rip off old RTD stories. But alas. You know, I've been fairly critical, so let's end with some positives, because there are definitely things to like about this episode. Most of the episode's positives have to do with the Toymaker, if you hadn't already guessed. He is such a fun villain, and whenever he's on screen, it's impossible not to enjoy yourself.
That is the final ball of all. Yeah.
The entire sequence when the Doctor and Donna are trapped in his realm is great. It's some of the most experimental and conceptual imagery the show's offered up in years, and like I said, experimental and conceptual is exactly what I think a limitless show such as this should strive to be. So risk-taking episodes like this will always have my respect, even if, as an episode, it's far from perfect. I'm still not sure how I feel about there now being 2 Doctors sharing the same universe. At least the last one didn't have a TARDIS, was human, and stuck in a parallel universe. Part of me wonders if the only reason he had the Doctor duplicate himself and gave that Doctor a spare TARDIS is because that's something he wanted to do the last time the Doctor duplicated himself, but for whatever reason the scene didn't make it to air.
And that was a big cut, this one, from episode 13. The Doctor giving the second Doctor the chance to grow his own TARDIS. We argued over this, and part of me still wishes it was in. Julie was right, though. It was just getting in the way of so many complicated endings and so many complicated emotions. So I like to imagine this still happened, though. So one day we'll come back and put this one back in.
So, after all these years, he's getting his way and finally giving an extra Doctor an extra TARDIS. Dreams do come true. And the new TARDIS has a ramp.
Wheelchair accessible.
At last, you finally caught up with the 21st century.
Which apparently was inspired by Doctor Who YouTuber Theories, which is cool for many reasons, but especially these 2. Reason 1, I've talked with Theories before and now I feel like I'm in the Doctor Who inner circle. And 2, this implies that Russell watches Doctor Who YouTubers. Russell, are you watching this right now? In terms of there being 2 Doctors now, I'm not necessarily against it as long as the idea is actually taken advantage of, and the 14th Doctor is brought back in some meaningful capacity, as opposed to the whole reason behind this being so that the 10th Doctor could get yet another happily ever after. Please tell me. Please tell me that this wasn't just for that reason. When I first watched this episode, it was my least favorite of the bunch, but after rewatching all the episodes, it's overtaken the Starbeast in my eyes for one simple reason. One Shooty-Gatwa-shaped reason. Oh my lord, he's so charismatic in this role.
This is a ladder into top floor.
I can tell right off the cuff that he's perfect casting for the Doctor, and I will admit, I was very skeptical when I first saw the announcement that the guy from Sex Education was going to be the next Doctor Who.
Oh, does it.
But hot damn, those misgivings have been thoroughly cast aside. The Church on Ruby Road is, in many ways, the most important of the 4 specials because it's basically meant to be the pilot to Doctor Who's new era. It's basically RTD's 2023 version of Rose. And there are a lot of parallels between the 2 episodes. The episode is initially told from the companion's POV. The Doctor is portrayed as being especially mysterious, and he wears a leather jacket. The new companion in question has a surprise encounter with him in which he saves her life. After this point, the Doctor keeps popping up in her life because she's now at the center of an alien threat to humanity, which culminates in someone important in her personal life getting kidnapped by aliens. Though she's initially frustrated with the Doctor for his blasé attitude, she quickly becomes fascinated with the mystery of who he is. The episode's antagonist takes a backseat to the building relationship of the 2 leads and ends up just being a blobby, lumpy guy who can't talk and just makes hissing noises. The episode ends with the companion leaving her loved ones behind and running into the TARDIS. Obviously, Rose and Ruby are somewhat similar, and I'm not just talking about them both being blondes that have a first name beginning with R. They're both characters who lack something important in their lives, and they find it through the Doctor. For the first 19 years of Rose's life, nothing happened, and then she met her uncle, the Doctor.
For the first 19 years of my life, nothing happened. And then I met a man called the Doctor.
Some of the parallels between the two episodes are definitely intentional. In fact, there are some outright homages in here. In the scene when the Doctor rescues Ruby from the Snowman of Death, does this building seem familiar at all? Because it should. It was that building. It was the Rose building. They did a really good job of renovating it after it blew up. And sure, it's true that Doctor Who is no stranger to reusing sets, but I don't think this one was a coincidence. So with all these parallels in mind, does Ruby Road do as good a job as Rose of introducing a new era of the show? Well, that's a difficult question to answer for two reasons. One, I don't actually like Rose as an individual episode all that much because it feels fairly bland by today's Who standards, and also it has this hideous walking shot. And two, the reason Rose feels bland by today's Who standards is because it effectively reinvented the wheel. The Who wheel. Everything about Rose, and Series 1 for that matter, was written to feel as different from Doctor Who's classic series as it possibly could. I suspect that, as a child, there were certain things Russell wanted to see in Doctor Who that it just wasn't delivering on, so when he finally had the reins, it was wish fulfillment time. Stories used to be long, slow, and dialogue heavy. Now they're short, fast, and more action-packed than ever. We used to see essentially nothing of the companions' lives and relationships outside of the TARDIS. Now their home lives are a core aspect of the show. There used to be no hanky-panky in the TARDIS, but now there is.
You telling me you do dance?
900 years old, me. I've been around a bit. I think you can assume at some point I've danced.
You?
Well, I've got the moves, but I wouldn't want to boast.
The Doctor always used to save the day at the end of each story, no strings attached. But now, if he isn't careful, by defeating the baddies, he might accidentally create a power vacuum by ousting the incumbent regime, opening the door for an even worse regime to take control, leading to a follow-up story a few episodes later where he has to confront his own mistakes.
Last time I was here, I put it right.
No, but that's when it first went wrong. All the news channels, they just shut down overnight.
I did that.
There was nothing left in their place. No information. The whole planet just froze. That was the start of it. 100 years of hell.
I made this work.
So yeah, Russell changed things up. Rose is to Doctor Who as Ocarina of Time is to 3D adventure games. It seems a bit bland today, but that's only because it set down the foundations that everything after it copied. The notable difference being that Ocarina of Time still holds up really well, and Rose is a tad aged. So when we look at the church on Ruby Road as a pilot to a new era of the show, I can't really pretend as if it's all that different from anything we've already seen. Apart from the fantasy and musical elements on display, which, I will admit,
that is a first.
This episode kind of just feels like more of the same. Ironically, even by today's standards, Rose still feels more risque in places, especially in how dark it makes the Doctor's character.
Look, if I did forget some kid called Mickey...
Yeah, it's not a kid.
Because I'm busy trying to save the life of every stupid ape blundering about on top of this planet, all right?
Okay, so it's not exactly a bold new direction for the show. Whatever. It can still be a good episode on its own merits, right? Well, yes, it could have been, but it's kind of not. The story of the episode is that goblins are trolling Ruby. They target Ruby because there are a lot of coincidences in her life.
Hello, Ruby Sunday. And it's a Sunday right now. That's a coincidence.
And they like coincidences. They eat coincidences for breakfast. That and babies. Ruby doesn't know who her mom is, so she tries to turn to reality TV to give her the answers she desperately craves. Classic mistake.
You are the father.
But they're useless, and the goblins make a Christmas tree fall on the show's host.
There is no trace of your mum or dad.
And next time, it might be...
The Doctor catches on to the fact that the goblins are messing with Ruby at some point off screen and starts stalking her to make sure she's okay. Fast forward a little bit and Ruby is babysitting. The goblins break into her house and take the baby so that they can eat it, as goblins do.
Do you know why they call them goblins? Because they like to gobble you up.
Leading to a chase sequence. Oh, did I say chase sequence? I meant song.
Cause the Goblin King, or the Goblin King, it's so good to meet you, you great big thing.
The Doctor and Ruby manage to get their baby back, but as revenge, the goblins go back in time and eat Ruby as a baby.
Ruby? Where did she go?
Who's Ruby?
Your daughter?
Now the orphan children that Ruby helped raise are gone and the world is a worse place.
You fostered 33.
Don't be so stupid. That's too much like hard work. 800 quid per child.
Don't say that.
Really hammer it home there.
I think you got me mixed up with someone else. Because there is no Ruby. It's just me, stuck with my old mum.
Yeah, I got it. She's miserable now.
Up here in the attic, and I'm busy. This little brat arrives ruining my holiday.
I am getting it, thank you.
Christmas Day, Mum's asleep by 3. And I'll be all on my own.
I too love subtlety. So the Doctor also goes back in time and stabs the Goblin King with a church spire. Because symbolism? And then the ship disappears and the Doctor catches baby Ruby. Would have been really awkward if the baby had been in a different part of the ship that wasn't directly over top of the Doctor. That would have been a big yikes. Oh, and I noticed while editing that, again, they cut the shot of him catching the baby wrong, so you can see that he was already holding it before he lowers his arms. You just have to cut a few more frames off, and it'll work. You're killing me here, editor. Then the Doctor sees Ruby's mysterious mom, but decides not to learn anything about who she is because he's a dick. 12 would not approve. So that's the plot of the episode, and if you couldn't tell from that summary, it's very goofy. I guess I'm just curious as to why Russell decided to make the launching pad to his new era this juvenile. It can be hard to even make sense of at points.
If you have lots of accidents, it stitches you in, it weaves you into the day, you become all complicated and knotted and vivid.
I've literally no idea what any of that means. The Teletubbies parallels don't just end at the TARDIS.
Tell us, who have you played before?
I'm Poe from the Teletubbies.
Look at that! Poe from Teletubbies, can you believe it? Unbelievable.
It's all connected. I suppose any of the plot's contrivances could be countered by the fact that the goblins love coincidences, so any coincidences in this episode's plot are intentional. But to me at least, a story that's reliant on fantasy, coincidences, and, let's be honest, random shit, feels a little overly juvenile even for Doctor Who standards. I mean, I know Doctor Who is a kid's show and all, but when people say that, what they really mean is that it's a family show. It's meant to appeal to all ages so the whole family can snuggle in and watch it on the telly together. This episode, however, feels like it's aiming at a really, really low age demographic, and I personally don't think that that was the best idea. If you recall, I had the same issue with the Chibnall era. Episodes had paper-thin concepts, live, laugh, love characters, and baby's first lessons to finish off an episode delivered almost patronizingly by the Doctor directly to the audience themselves.
On the 21st of December 1956, segregation on buses in Montgomery was ended.
It took so long though. Her whole life.
You want me to tell you that Earth's gonna be okay? 'Cause I can't. Unless people face facts and change, catastrophe is coming. Tesla keeps on inventing, but no money, no fame. That's not right. People should know.
Doctor, who's that? It's John Lennon. And in 1980, he was shot outside his apartment building for no reason. That's so not cool. Shooting people's wrong. I agree with Ryan, shooting people is wrong. Many viewers above the age of 10 felt alienated by this, and even viewers under the age of 10 weren't watching because they were busy playing Fortnite because at least Fortnite is fun. As we saw then, aiming the show exclusively at kids does not pay off in the long term. And even though this episode isn't quite as bad as the Chibnall era in this regard, I think the issue is still present. Look, I'll be the first to admit that I've always wanted Doctor Who to attempt something really out there, like a musical episode, specifically one in the style of Labyrinth.
Dance, magic dance, dance, magic dance.
Even though obviously they can't get David Bowie, but still. That's always been on my wish list, so the fact that we actually got an episode with singing goblins and a goblin king kind of makes me feel as if Russell has found a way to hack into my brain. But despite this, the episode's sheer level of cringe, combined with the fact that the music isn't actually all that good, sort of prevents me from enjoying the episode as much as I would have otherwise. And yes, I said it, the goblin song is bad. I can hear the autotune in every note. Send me your hate mail. Even beyond this, there are other aspects of this episode that kind of throw me off. I feel like the execution just isn't as good here as it was in prior episodes. The pacing, especially near the beginning, feels off. Like, we get a scene with Ruby encountering bad luck at an interview. And then we smash cut to another scene of her getting bad luck at a concert that lasts for like 20 seconds before we're hit over the head with another scene of her encountering bad luck at a club. And considering we don't even know this character yet, it doesn't really flow very well. It just feels like a barrage of information. One thing I put a lot of stock into is character introductions. After all, first impressions are everything. Something as small as the first shot a character appears in can color how an audience views them. Cake. Is this character powerful, mysterious, evil, innocent, intimidating, unassuming, or at least so the writers would like you to think? Bob's your uncle. I understand that Ncuti Gatwa does appear at the end of the Giggle, but based on my understanding, this is the episode that's supposed to be the jumping on point for new viewers, so a lot of people's first impression of the Doctor is going to be this. First he's watching her from afar, and then he's dancing in the bar she's in. And then he teleports over to her just in time to catch her drink. Look, I know he's a Time Lord and all, but how the fuck did he do that? And again, they edited the shot wrong, so you can see he was already holding the glass before he lowers his hand. This is just getting sloppy at this point, Now, for comparison, here's how the 9th Doctor was introduced in Rose. That was the perfect entrance for him as a character. I can't imagine any moment that could have thematically summed up their relationship better than that. Meanwhile, in this episode, the first time Ruby sees the Doctor is when he's dancing at a bar during a dance montage. Really? That's their first interaction? And then the Doctor makes things even worse by getting all creepy with her.
Does that happen to you a lot? Knocking things over?
I'm just clumsy.
No, you're not. It's worse than that. Merry Christmas.
I would run away immediately. I think the first time Ruby, and by extension us, saw the Doctor in this episode should have been when he caught her drink. It would have made for a much more meaningful and impactful entrance into the story as opposed to these awkward stitched-on shots of him standing somewhere. Why even bother showing him at all? He doesn't do anything, and I don't even know where he is relative to her because of the lack of establishing shots. It just feels really awkward and clunky. I understand that the point is to convey that the Doctor is watching over Ruby, but that could have been conveyed through subtext. Maybe you see the TARDIS in the background of one of the scenes, or some other subtle indicator the Doctor is there without literally showing him. Either way, it's already implied the Doctor was watching over her by having him show up at the club, so stamping him over prior scenes just doesn't really feel needed. To me, this is a textbook example of poor editing, wherein an editor wants to show something, but they don't really have a clever way to introduce it into the scene, so they just smash cut to it even if it's completely disconnected from what's going on. The all-time most infamous example of this can be found in Ed Wood's magnum opus, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Sometimes in the middle of a scene, the movie will just randomly cut to a shot of Vampira or fake Bela Lugosi, for seemingly no reason other than to remind you that they exist.
Now you stay close to the officer, honey.
I'd feel safer with you.
Now the lieutenant knows best.
And no, in case you're wondering, they're not even in the same location as the other characters. You'll watch through the whole scene waiting for them to become relevant, but they never do. Now, obviously this episode's editing is not nearly as bad as Plan 9 from Outer Spaces, but I really feel as if these unnecessary shots seriously cheapen his actual entrance into the episode. Yes, in the grand scheme of things this may sound fairly minor, but Rose just does so much better of a job introducing a brand new audience to this character.
I'm the Doctor, by the way. What's your name?
Rose.
Nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life.
On that note, the directing throughout the entire episode is very bizarre in places, and there are way too many uncomfortable close-up shots for my taste.
Hold on. You mean now?
Today, Christmas Eve!
That's amazing!
I was foundled. I love that.
You'd think this was directed by someone who worked on the Chibnall era. Oh. Okay then. Even with all of this being said, there are aspects of this episode that I like. It has a heart, it's fun, we're finally getting a Christmas special for the first time since Chibnall decided he hates Christmas.
There can only be one Chris on Doctor Who.
fuck out of here, Santa.
But like Rose, as an individual episode, I don't think it's really something to write home about, which is a shame because Ncudi's doctor absolutely is. He is so charismatic and loquacious, holy moly.
Last time I saw Doctor, he tried to murder me, so you stay away.
Even his laugh, man. That's a Time Lord's laugh right there. So that's it then. All 4 specials. Obviously I had my gripes with them, but who cares what I think? What really matters is what the general public thought. So what did they thought? Well, unfortunately, the answer to this question is very deeply tied to politics. I'm sorry.
I would like to make a hat out of your fucking entrails.
Now, when I say politics, I mean it in 2 senses of the word. One, the obvious way, the cultural impact of these episodes and how people responded to their social messaging. 2, the off-camera politics that go into making a show, aka the social hierarchies and behind-the-scenes drama that led to these episodes being the way they are. It's the same way Christopher Eccleston used the word when criticizing the behind-the-scenes politics of Series 1.
I love being associated with the character, just don't like being associated with those people and the politics that went on in the first series.
And then, of course, a bunch of terrible YouTubers misinterpreted this as Chris complaining about wokeness in Doctor Who and went to town spreading misinformation far and wide. But what Chris is actually saying here should be of great interest to any Doctor Who fan. We'll come back to this in a bit. First, we're going to tackle real politics. We'll get it over with quickly, I promise.
I will tear your fucking skin off. I will wear it to your mother's birthday party, and I will rub your nuts up and down her leg whilst whistling Bohemian fucking Rhapsody.
Doctor Who is no stranger to politics. It has long had political messaging in its episodes, since the very beginning, if we're being honest.
There are always those who resist progress. Progress! Don't listen to him. He means fatter profits for global chemicals.
But it was only around the time Capaldi was leaving and Chibnall was taking over that the backlash from conservatives started to foment. Which is funny because Chibnall's first season is markedly less left-wing than Peter Capaldi's last season is. There's literally an entire episode in Series 10 devoted to critiquing capitalism.
The end point of capitalism, where human life has no value at all. We're fighting an algorithm, like every worker everywhere.
Whereas Series 11 has an episode about how big corporations are actually good and workers' rights are bad.
They want us to be grateful that 10% of people get to work. What about the other 90%? What about our future? We can't let the systems take control!
The systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem. People like you.
Kerblam, the company in this episode, is an overt stand-in for Amazon, and it's clearly described throughout the episode that they treat their workers like dirt.
Constant, random monitoring. No such thing as privacy here.
How often do you see your daughter?
Twice a year I splurge on an economy shuttle.
Unnecessary talking can lead to efficiency reductions. Why not pick up the pace a little?
The systems aren't the problem.
How does the Doctor punish this corporation for abusing its workforce? She tells them off a little and then they promise they'll do better and leave.
And I'm going to propose that Kerblam becomes a people-led company in future. Majority organics. People, I mean...
Aw, she called people organics. So wholesome. How does she punish the person fighting for workers' rights? She kills him. Like, I understand that you had to stop his plan, but did you really have to, like, detonate a bunch of bombs on top of him? So as we can see, Series 11 is clearly where things got woke because woman. Either way, things have only snowballed since then. The discourse surrounding these specials has been completely poisoned by the current political landscape, and I do find that annoying, but it's also worth pointing out that there are a lot of issues with how these episodes go about their social messaging, just like in the Chibnall era.
Then let's make it 2023.
I already talked about how I think Russell mishandled the trans representation in the Star Beast, but beyond that, there are more decisions that puzzle me a little. For instance, there was a lot of controversy over Davies' decision to make Davros, a character who's usually depicted in a wheelchair, able to walk in the Children in Need special Destination Skaro. He did this because, in his eyes, Davros represented a negative depiction of wheelchair users.
There's a problem with the Davros of old in that he's a wheelchair user who is evil. I had problems with that, and a lot of us on the production team had the problems with that, of associating disability with evil, and trust me, there's a very long tradition of this. I say this is how we see Davros now. 2023, this is our lens.
And before I go any further, I have to throw out the obvious disclaimer. I'm not disabled. If you watching this video are disabled and you disagree with what I have to say, your thoughts on the matter are more valuable than mine. Don't feel as if I'm trying to invalidate your opinion. This is just how I feel based on everything I can observe. For starters, Russell is 100% correct in identifying that there is a very common trope in fiction of having villains be disabled or disfigured in some way. And I think it's definitely worth talking about that. However, I also don't think it'd be fair to say that there are no circumstances in which a disabled villain would be acceptable. I think it's worth analyzing on a case-by-case basis why the creators chose to make an antagonist disabled, and if these reasons are objectionable or understandable. For example, I doubt many people would complain about a disabled or disfigured antagonist in a story which also features a disabled or disfigured protagonist, or if the story properly empathizes with them in some way and humanizes them. On the flip side, I think the most objectionable disabled antagonists in fiction are the ones that are disabled specifically so that they'll seem different or other to the audience. But most disabled villains don't fall on either side of the spectrum. Most of them are somewhere in the middle, including Davros. Davros wasn't a character who was born disabled, nor did his disability in any way cause him to become evil. He was born onto a war-torn planet and suffered crippling injuries after the building he was in got shelled. He nearly died, but through his own life support systems, he was able to keep himself alive. As time went on, he continued to age, and his life support system kept him artificially alive well beyond the average lifespan of his species. His body grew increasingly disfigured until he became entirely unrecognizable, and that's the state he's in when we first meet him in Genesis of the Daleks. A man clinging to life at all costs, trying to create something capable of outliving him and carrying his legacy forward come his demise.
Davros is dying.
Davros is ancient. He should have been dust centuries ago.
The Daleks are a manifestation of Davros' will to immortality. They are what he wishes he could be. He looks the way he does because by this point he is effectively half Dalek himself. He's augmented himself to such an extent that there's hardly any of the authentic Davros left. That's why he doesn't sit in a normal wheelchair. I don't even know if you could call it a wheelchair. Doesn't have wheels. He sits in a chair that looks exactly like the bottom half of a Dalek, and in terms of his physical appearance, it's a representation of his transformation into something resembling his own creation. So personally, I think branding him as just another evil wheelchair-using villain is kind of missing the point of his character a little. Can we at least agree that there was no reason to set this short on Skaro? If Russell didn't want to feature a disabled villain in a Children in Need special, which I fully understand and appreciate, that's fine. But why go out of your way to pick a previously disabled character to be the villain of the special just so you can undisable them? Why not just choose a different villain? And why respond to fans on social media who are critical of the change, even ones who are being wholly respectful, with such hostility, some of whom seem to be wheelchair users themselves? It seems, to me at least, like Russell picked Davros to make a statement. Like he knew this would cause controversy and generate a lot of press, and he wanted it to, because he wants it to be known that this era will not be problematic in ways the show may have been in the past. Russell's first era of Doctor Who had not one, not two, but three different wheelchair-bound villains, though you have to extend the definition of the word wheelchair in some cases. Russell doesn't acknowledge this anywhere in any of his statements regarding Davros, but I can't help but suspect that part of the reason why he's making such a show of this is because he wants to apologize for these past decisions of his. Though this is just pure speculation on my part. I feel a similar way about the trans representation in the Star Beast. Believe it or not, Rose is not the first trans character Russell's ever written for the show. That would be Cassandra O'Brien.
That's where I used to live when I was a little boy, down there.
Yes, the human trampoline that was meant to satirize vanity and cosmetic surgery was Doctor Who's first ever trans character.
I've had my chin completely taken away, and look at the difference. Look how thin I am.
How many operations have you had?
708. Next week, it's 709. I'm having my blood bleached.
Was this intentional transphobia on Russell's part? I doubt it. It's just a throwaway line, and considering this episode came out in 2005, before trans issues were really mainstream, he probably just threw the line in there as a joke without thinking twice about it. But even so, I suspect that he probably regrets this one. And like with Davros, I think the Star Beast may have been driven in part by his own guilt.
Honestly, it doesn't hurt.
I would rather die. It's better to die than live like you, a bitchy trampoline.
She didn't even do anything to you yet, Rose. Just let her live her life. Jeez, go back to your uncle. There are a lot of little things like this in Russell's era, to be honest. Like, as far as I know, there's only one homophobic line in all of Doctor Who, and it was written by Russell T Davies.
And I've never been slapped by someone's mother.
Your face.
It hurts.
You're so gay.
And obviously, Russell T Davies is a gay man, so I'm not accusing him of being homophobic. I think he was just playing to the culture of the time, and it resulted in some moments that he probably wishes he'd never written. And thus we get overcompensation. Even something like the 13th Doctor's clothes regenerating with her is an example of Russell writing like he's on very thin ice. Why was this necessary? Russell's explanation is as follows. I was very certain that I didn't want David to appear in Jodie's costume. I think the notion of men dressing in women's clothes, the notion of drag is very delicate. I'm a huge fan of that culture and the dignity of that. It's truly a valuable thing, but it has to be done with immense thought and respect. With respect to Jodie and her doctor, I think it can look like mockery when a straight man wears her clothes. To put a great big 6-foot Scotsman into them looks like we're taking the mickey. So here, Russell has given a socio-political reason for why the 14th Doctor can't wear Jodie's costume, but he never gave a story reason. As of now, there is still no story reason for why this happened. And I don't think there's gonna be. This again plays into what I was talking about earlier with Dave Filoni's approach to writing Star Wars. Is it okay to write something that doesn't actually make any sense just for the sake of hitting on new ideas or themes? Like I said, as long as you're a creative writer, in my opinion, there's no reason you should have to throw logic out the window just to tackle a certain issue. Genuinely, why not even attempt to write in an explanation? The fact that he didn't, again, makes me think that he left it like this intentionally to make a statement. But why?
Why?
What is to be achieved by doing that, narratively or politically? In fact, how is this even really progressive in the first place? I understand that his intention is to be respectful to Jodie and potentially avoid giving the anti-woke media an image they can latch onto, but all he's really doing here is censoring a man from appearing in women's clothing on mainstream TV. If that's the definition of progressive, then the 80s was a very progressive time. Freddie Mercury doing drag on TV would have been way too much for the masses to handle. Better ban it and relegate drag to designated quarantine zones where it won't spill out into anything else. Is it not more progressive to cast aside the gendered notions of who can wear what clothing and show David Tennant wearing clothes that would be typically deemed as feminine for millions of viewers to see? Tabloids be damned. Also, damn, David Tennant looks kind of fine in women's clothing. And the real kicker here is that Jodie said herself that she didn't want her outfit to be viewed as feminine. She wanted it to be viewed as gender-neutral clothing.
The main journey of it came from a photograph that I found of a woman in trousers, braces and a t-shirt walking, and it felt timeless, it felt intriguing, and it was neither male or female, which was really important to me.
So ultimately, it isn't really respectful to her wishes to have her clothing change like this, just so that David Tennant won't be seen in women's clothing. This isn't the only time that one of Russell's attempts to be progressive kind of backfired. Let's turn our attention back to the Toymaker, who, as Doctor Who Unleashed points out, was a somewhat racist character in his original depiction.
Why was the original Toymaker, who was a white man, dressed up as a Chinese Mandarin? Why?
This was a different time, when production teams would not have appreciated the impact this form of stereotyping would have on the audience. Today, we live in a diverse society where cultural appropriation is not acceptable.
Russell's so sensitive to this, he doesn't even want to refer to the Toymaker by the name Celestial Toymaker, because apparently...
The word Celestial can mean of Chinese origin in a derogatory way. Yeah, it also means from the sky, but it can also mean Chinese.
Going off this, I would have assumed that Russell would have chosen to just make the Toymaker not be racist anymore, but he goes a different route.
And in acknowledgement of his past, Russell's Toymaker still has a clear and deliberate racist aspect.
People will pipe up saying in 1966 this was a racist character. I did not want to whitewash the Toymaker then, so I gave him this side of putting on accents.
So what Russell is saying here is that he thinks it's an important part of the Toymaker's character to be racist, so he's racist against Germans and Danes now instead of Chinese people, Problem solved?
Oh, well, that's all right then.
Ironically, by doing this, Russell writes the toy maker in such a fashion as to play into one of the most common villain stereotypes of all time, to make your villain German, or in his case, pretending to be German, but it still comes off that way. And people don't choose to be German. They're born that way. Believe it or not. Look, I normally love to see television shows embracing progressive ideas, I really do, but Russell's approach to progressiveness in these specials can feel a little performative? I don't say that in an accusatory way, I'm sure his heart was in the right place, but it all just comes across as a little misguided.
Something a male presenting Time Lord will never understand. You're assuming he as a pronoun.
My chosen pronoun is the definite article.
It's weird to have that in the episode but still refer to the Meep as a he in the script. This extends even to some of the smaller decisions made by Russell in these specials, like casting a brown actor to play Sir Isaac Newton, which you may have noticed I didn't bring up before now because it's such a small part of the episode that I really don't think it's worth getting hung up on. A lot of people felt personally attacked by this casting decision. Do I care about it that much? No, but I wouldn't really call this casting decision progressive either, as many have in its defense. Why do I say that? Well, Doctor Who has kind of developed a habit of presenting British history with rose-tinted goggles. Now, that's not to be confused with me condemning patriotism in Doctor Who. I think that's a-okay. I mean, American media is full of patriotism, so why can't Doctor Who be?
Only an idiot hangs the Union flag upside down. Shame on you.
I'm more talking to the moments when Doctor Who intentionally whitewashes Britain's past. Well, whitewashing might not be the best term here, but you know what I mean. Now, this isn't the first time that Doctor Who has implied that British history is very diverse.
You'd be surprised. Elizabethan England, not so different from your time.
Regency England. A bit more black than they show in the movies.
History's a whitewash.
The thing is, it is actually 100% true that there were people of color living in London around this time. However, most estimates place them around 10,000 in a city of 1 million, which would have made up 1% of the population. So when Thin Ice portrays 1800s London as a diverse ethnic melting pot, it is a bit of an exaggeration. Stephen Moffat has spoken on this directly, saying, "We've kind of got to tell a lie. We'll go back into history and there will be black people where historically there wouldn't have been, and we won't dwell on that. We'll say to hell with it, this is the imaginary, better version of the world. By believing in it, we'll summon it forth." And that's completely fair. That's a reasonable stance to take on the matter. Even if it's not 100% historically accurate, this show also features Shakespeare fighting witches and the Doctor destroying Satan by pushing him into a black hole. So, is this really pushing it too far? No. Though I do find it a little bizarre how the episode frames this information as if it's empirically true.
A bit more black than they show in the movies.
The only point I'm trying to make here is that this fits into a larger trend of Doctor Who kind of cleansing British history. Speaking as a foreigner, this is one of the main things that jumps out at me in the show when watching historical episodes. I think we all remember how the show portrayed Winston Churchill as a nice, jovial, fun-loving guy.
A record? Good Lord, man, have you never heard of downloads?
So wholesome. No skeletons in that closet whatsoever. This may just be my opinion, but I wouldn't call it progressive to just kind of pretend that Britain never had issues with deep-rooted racism, and on the occasion that they do show a racist, it's implied that they're just kind of an exception. Is that not kind of erasure of everything minority groups had to struggle through? Is it not more progressive to portray historical racism as it was so that an audience can be educated on it? Especially if we're talking about an audience of children. And the show has done this, like in the episode Rosa from Series 11, which received a lot of praise for tackling racism head-on, except that this episode is set in Alabama. In fact, when you start looking, you notice a clear difference between how the US and UK are portrayed throughout the show.
You think you can just shoot me?
They're Americans!
The first ever Doctor Who story set in the US is about gun violence.
People keep giving me guns, and I do wish they wouldn't. I wonder, would you mind looking after it for me?
My pleasure.
The next story set in the US... Okay, I guess we're doing this again. To be fair, what actually ends up killing the Seventh Doctor in the end is the US healthcare system. So that's a whole other can of worms. There is a clear pattern that episodes set in the United States tackle issues with the United States head-on.
Young boy,
He'll be swinging from a tree with a noose for a neckerchief. If he touches a white woman, it'll be over.
Whereas episodes set in Britain, more often than not, pretend that those issues never happened. Even episodes that are technically set in the UK but feature an American antagonist still play into this trend.
What's wrong with you people? What is wrong with this country? Why don't you do what normal people do? Get a gun, shoot things like a civilized person.
Now, there are exceptions to this rule, like Demons of the Punjab, which, unless I'm missing something, is the only time Doctor Who has ever aired an episode that was even slightly critical of the British Empire. But I digress, this rule holds pretty true throughout the show's entire run. Man, America seems like such an awful place where everyone's Donald Trump.
The future president of the United States.
How's this for fire and fury?
Real subtle there. But Britain? We've never done anything objectionable. Britain was always a super diverse and accepting place, and Winston Churchill was a great guy who the Doctor would definitely not abhor. I agree that Doctor Who needs more people of color in its cast, but I think the way to go about that, if we're talking about historical episodes, is to shine more of a light onto non-white historical figures that commonly get overlooked, instead of just putting even more attention onto Sir Isaac Newton, a white historical figure that everyone's already familiar with. Now, all of this being said, even though I think Russell's approach to politics in Doctor Who has been far from perfect as of late, there's a far more destructive force currently targeting the show. It's not Russell, it's the Backlash.
David Tennant once again takes the role of the Time Lord, the Doctor, and nobody cared.
Even though I think there's plenty you can criticize about the show right now and the way it's being run, a lot of people have been criticizing it for the worst possible reasons, and taking things to an extreme that's frankly unhealthy. Being that we live in a time of culture war, Doctor Who has become one of the hottest new fronts, and the majority of discourse about these specials has nothing to do with the plots, but rather a few specific moments that people talk about over and over and over again. Asking the Meep for its pronouns, a male presenting Time Lord, a brown actor playing Isaac Newton, the Doctor saying Isaac Newton looked hot.
Was Isaac Newton hot?
He was, wasn't he? He was so hot.
This is all some people care to talk about because their brains have been ruined by an endless stream of culture war bullshit in their feeds.
Shame you're not a woman anymore, because you'd understand. But you're male presenting, aren't you, Doctor Who? I know how we'll sign up the population. I know what we can do, because we're trying to destroy gender roles and we're trying to destroy everything else, so that all the kids grow up and wear wigs and castrate themselves medically, and then we'll have everybody controlled as eunuchs.
Yes, that is Andrew Tate complaining about Doctor Who. I don't know what timeline we're in. The fact of the matter is that this is not actual nuanced discussion of the specials. It's nothing more than political rhetoric.
He inserted so much deviant messaging and woke BS. Donna's son-daughter and Tennant suddenly being gay, and it was awful. But this is supposed to be a pseudo-intellectual show, right? And thus, we should be as factually accurate as we can be.
Oh, just shut the hell up. Reality check time for the canceling salivating mob coming into my comment section, and it's sad that I have to make disclaimers in every video on this subject.
The length some of these videos go to defame not only Russell, but anyone even remotely associated with the show can be a little off-putting. I've seen videos that accuse Russell of being a pathological liar because he remembered a fact wrong on a podcast.
No one's done this since Rose Tyler many years ago. Good old Billy. Really? Did a circuit of the TARDIS, and wouldn't you?
Victorian Clara in The Snowman, she does a complete circuit around the TARDIS, checking for tricks and traps along the way. So we have established that RTD is not telling the truth here. Now, why is he lying?
I mean, there's always the chance that he made a mistake, as human beings are known to do. There's also the issue of narratives flip-flopping whenever it's convenient. 6 years ago, Stephen Moffat was the woke writer who ruined Doctor Who, and Russell T Davies was the GOAT.
The angry, man-hating feminist bile that spews out of some of the characters' mouths goes unchallenged.
Now the narrative has completely switched.
Honestly, I don't know why people complained so much about Stephen Moffat when he was in charge. Remember, of course, when you are the showrunner of a BBC show, you pretty much have have no choice but to say all that crap. Like, we need to represent more different colours and women. And so I never bought that Moffat actually really believed in this stuff. Of course, you're going to have to say that. You work for the fucking BBC. They're communists.
Funny enough, Stephen Moffat actually came across one of these videos and got so annoyed by it that he directly tweeted about it, debunking it.
Stephen Moffat, the former Doctor Who showrunner, personal hero of mine, and to my knowledge the least sullied of all the modern Who showrunners, had replied. And apparently debunked my video. I mean, I'm quite happy to have received this response. And, you know, if that is really you, Stephen Moffat, then thank you very much for trying to clarify. However, I kind of have to take issue with the response.
Now, in all fairness, I'm not calling out every commentary channel that's ever made a critical video of Doctor Who. Some of them are perfectly fine. I'm specifically talking about the ones that are clearly made in bad faith. And over the past few months, YouTube has presented me with more bad faith videos than I can count. These thumbnails are genuinely nightmare fuel. Like, what is this? Who makes this? Who is this fetish shit? And honestly, I could probably spend hours going over all of them, but I've decided to hone in on just one that I think perfectly encapsulates what most of these videos are like. Say hello to Reaper, an up-and-coming YouTube reviewer, who has many more subscribers than me, so I don't have to feel guilty about punching down. He's made a series of decently successful videos tearing into the 60th anniversary specials, mostly because of them being woke. And here's a snippet from one of them.
David Tennant is all sad and actually starts to cry on his black counterpart's shoulder, probably because he considers winning too masculine.
How dare they make the Doctor cry? The Doctor never would have cried back in the good old days when the show was good.
So he must have a big long cry in order to balance it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're crying like a woman.
I love all the Futurama and Family Guy cutaways throughout these videos, by the way. They're gold.
He keeps asking the fat black woman if they remember Ruby. The Doctor is a Time Lord who deals with situations like this every day, yet he is so shocked by this, so upset, that he actually begins to cry.
Is it really that out of character for the Doctor to cry after someone he formed an emotional connection with doesn't only die, but gets wiped from existence along with dozens of other foster children because of his own actions?
There is no excuse for him to be crying over this, other than the writers wanted him to be a weak, pathetic character that shows zero masculinity.
You're crying like a woman.
Hey, there it is again.
There is no excuse for him to be crying over this, other than the writers wanted him to be a weak, pathetic character.
These videos are the poster child for bad faith analysis that's clearly meant to push a political agenda. That's my nice way of saying that they're full of hate speech.
Speaking of which, his son is now a chick with a dick who goes by the name of Rose. As his original name was Jason, she ends up getting saved by her daughter, who just so happens to have a penis. But of course, Donna and her daughter, who just so happens to have a penis.
I mean, he does try to criticize the actual plots of these episodes, but it quickly becomes evident that he doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Intercept teleport!
He then teleports the Ant people to him, because that too is yet another ability that he has now.
An ability that he has now? What are you talking about? Have you watched the show?
Now we're never gonna get her!
Oh, the Doctor's very good at teleports.
Many of his criticisms display either that he wasn't paying attention or did no research before making these videos. At one point, he criticizes Russell T Davies for not featuring Wilfred more in the Giggle.
Oh yeah, Wilfred is not even in this episode. He's only a man who the Doctor sacrifices life to save. Ah, fuck him. Why would they give us a character we would actually like to see, when instead we can just have wheels and her go-go gadget wheelchair?
It would have taken him approximately one Google search to find out that Wilfred was originally supposed to be in the Giggle, but the actor died before they could film it.
He came back to us to shoot what actually turned out to be his final scene. We didn't know that at the time. If we wanted to do more, because we love him, he wasn't well enough to do more.
But fuck it, who does research before posting videos, right? And some of his other criticisms just seem to display a lack of knowledge about culture.
He's wearing a vest and a skirt, probably so that Russell T Davies can get more upskirt shots.
Is that a fucking dress?
No, it's a kilt, because he's Scottish. But okay, it's a dress. Whatever makes it easier for you to claim that these episodes are destroying masculinity.
The Doctor has decided to love Dick now.
But I think my favorite moment out of any of his videos has to be this. So at the end of Church on Ruby Road, this woman reveals that she knows what the TARDIS is by straight up breaking the fourth wall.
It just disappeared.
Never seen a TARDIS before.
We don't yet know who she is, but she'll likely be significant to the upcoming season. Before this point in the episode, she pretends not to know what it is when other people are around because obviously she wants this to be secret. Either that or she didn't realize what it was until she saw it disappear. A very easy to understand plot point, right?
The final shot is of some random woman saying this.
Never seen a TARDIS before.
Let's go back to the beginning of the episode.
Have you seen what he's done? Putting that there?
Well, what makes you think it was me?
Because you've never liked me.
What the fuck are you talking about?
She had no idea what a TARDIS was, but now she does. Does nobody at the BBC double check their scripts anymore?
Come on, man. In this scene, he says that he's Superman, and yet in the next scene, he says he's Clark Kent and doesn't have superpowers anymore. I don't get it. Where did his superpowers go?
That doesn't even make any sense!
My god, do they even double check these scripts? Despite how obviously bad faith these videos are, people take them seriously and it informs how they view these specials. And obviously I didn't even like these specials that much, but it does bother me how dishonest and politically slanted discourse surrounding them has been. I'll be the first to admit that not every video I've ever made about Doctor Who is perfect, but at least I wasn't talking complete nonsense.
Get this bullshit splitting up of the Doctors is called by generation because even the act of regenerating is gay now.
Actually, you know what? Take everything I said back. This guy's amazing and we all need to make content more like his.
Gay generation.
Let's try to look at the other side of the equation for a minute here. Despite the massive backlash, and perhaps a larger than average amount of detractors, these episodes did quite well in a number of other areas. Most Doctor Who fans who'd been actively keeping up with the show seemed to be satisfied with them, which makes sense because they are an improvement on what came prior.
Chocolate.
And they received fairly high ratings despite what the anti-woke channels may tell you. So, with the jury having deliberated, putting all this evidence together, are these episodes capable of reinventing Doctor Who the same way Russell did back in 2005? And for that matter, can the show recoup the popularity it had 15 years ago?
Yeah. No.
I can't say in good confidence that these episodes are the show's salvation. But not because the episodes themselves aren't good enough. If you recall, the first few episodes of Series 1 aren't that great when push comes to shove either. The reason that I don't think these specials cut it as launching pads for a whole new series is because the problems plaguing these episodes aren't new. In fact, they're old. 19 years old to be exact. The same age as the episode Rose, which is also the same age that Rose is in that episode. I like funny coincidences. I mean, think about it. The Deus Ex Machinas, the needless overcomplicating the lore, bad editing, the reliance on series-long mystery boxes, the mishandling of politics, and the show seemingly being pivoted towards a younger audience than that which is actually watching it. These are all problems I've been criticizing in the show for years, and they crop up across every era of modern Who. Funny enough, I think the show's opening titles have become a perfect metaphor for this stagnation. What do I mean by this? Every single iteration of the show's opening since 2005 has had some kind of little mistake in it, or creative decision that I personally hate, that was never fixed. The 2005 titles were out of sync with the music in almost every episode they appeared in. You can tell because the sound effects aren't aligned properly. The Series 7 version of the 2010 titles has such ludicrously strong color filters put over everything it actively hurts to look at, and the contrast is dialed so high that the white-black balance of the vortex starts clipping. Oh god, it looks awful. The 2013 titles showcased a TARDIS that the VFX artists forgot to add lighting effects to. And as a cherry on top, the TARDIS doors open the wrong way. The 2014 titles were also out of sync with the music half the time. And has VFX that abruptly vanish before making it off screen. And the 2018 titles have text that is very visibly off-center. So this of course begs the question, is there a mistake in the newest version of the titles? Actually, there are two. The theremin in the opening music is slightly out of sync with the bass line, and when the text displaying the names of the lead actors was swapped out from David Tennant and Catherine Tate to Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson respectively, they somehow re-rendered everything a couple of frames off the mark, leaving a noticeable gap between the text itself and the TARDIS that's supposed to reveal it. On their own, none of these mistakes really matter, but when you pile them all on top of each other, you have to ask how this keeps happening over and over and over again. It is an actual curse. And even though little mistakes in the opening sequence don't really have any bearing on the actual quality of the show, I can't think of any other shows that have so regularly had this problem. It's like Doctor Who can make the same mistakes over and over and over and over again and never learn from them. A good example of this is how the show's audio is mixed. Music is frequently so loud that it's hard to hear what characters are even saying.
Your arms are too long.
And this has been a recurring problem since Series 1. Across almost 20 years of different editors, directors, and showrunners, this problem will not go away.
Open the gate! Use that cube thing, come on!
Sonic screwdriver.
Use it! Nah. I can't leave you, what will you do?
I must defend Her Majesty now. Don't think of me, just go.
Stop. You could very well be standing right outside a trap street.
This is devastating as you're imagining. Grateful you weren't there.
This is Commander Rickscore. The fleet is under attack from insurgents.
Let me see.
Oh, you're gonna be the baby.
I'm getting flashbacks to Sonic Adventure 2. And it's not just the volume of the music that I take issue with, but the quantity of music. Feel free to send your hate mail to me at the above email. I know that I've praised Murray religiously in the past, and it's true that he is a genius musician capable of writing music that can evoke emotions stronger than almost any dialogue ever could, but I don't see why virtually every second of every episode should be filled with his music, even scenes that really don't need it.
I don't think I ever knew it was going to be so much music. Just got the first episode and did that, and then did the second episode, and it slowly dawned on me that they were going to want music all the way through.
There's a scene from The Giggle where the Doctor and Mel are catching up, and it's a very sweet sentimental scene between two old friends. Yet, for some reason, there's this epic music blaring in the background that doesn't match with the scene's tone at all.
I travelled the stars. Good old Sablon Blitz. He lived till he was 101.
What?
Died falling over a whiskey bottle. That's a perfect way to go. He had this great big Viking funeral, and I thought, time to go home.
Couldn't this scene have just been silent? Or if there had to be music, why not something a little more sentimental or emotional?
But then I had to face up to the one thing I'd been running away from. I've got nothing.
I think the overabundance of music can actually take away from emotions that certain scenes are trying to convey. And once again, fitting my thesis here, this has been a problem for a long time. Take, for instance, this scene from 2015's Christmas special, The Husbands of River Song. It's a comedic scene in which the Doctor enters the TARDIS and, since he's undercover, has to pretend that he doesn't know it's bigger on the inside.
Before you come in, you better prepare yourself for a shock. It's not as snug as it looks.
Finally, it's my go.
Chicanery ensues.
Is it bigger?
Oh, yes.
On the inside.
Oh, you certainly grasped the essentials.
My entire understanding of physical space has been transformed!
When I first watched this scene, I didn't find it funny, but but I couldn't put my finger on why. The premise of the scene and the lines themselves are actually pretty good, and yet it just doesn't make me laugh.
Three-dimensional Euclidean geometry has been torn up, thrown in the air, and snubbed to death!
Why? Well, at some point I suddenly realized that the reason I don't find this scene funny is because of the music. You see, over the seasons, Murray developed a habit of adding funny clown music to comedic scenes.
What are you like?
I don't know. Gandalf. Bit of space Gandalf. Or the little green one in Star Wars. Personally, he prefers to be called Stormageddon, Dark Lord of all.
Sorry, what?
That's what he calls himself.
Look at me.
Yep, looking.
Seriously?
To me, at least, there is no better way to make something not funny than by adding funny music to it. Seriously, let's try watching this scene without music.
God! It's bigger!
Yes.
On the inside.
Look, we need to concentrate.
There it is!
Yep, I know where you're going with this, but I need you to calm down.
On the outside?
Am I crazy, or is this so much better?
Sorry. I've always wanted to see that done properly.
Would you like a drink? Help yourself.
I won't say that comedic music never works, especially during montages, but as a rule of thumb, I think it should be used sparingly, and this show does not use it sparingly. At the end of the day, I suppose this is subjective, but I think there's a reason that awkward humor is usually conveyed without music in most pieces of media, because without music, the joke just speaks for itself.
What a brilliant joke!
Whereas when funny music is blaring in the background, it almost feels as if the scene is trying to be funny. It's kind of like the musical equivalent of a laugh track. And I personally think that directors should take the same approach to humor in films and TV as stand-up comedians do to a live set. You never want the audience to think you're desperately trying to be funny. You just want to be funny, if you get me. Just my take on it, though. And now that Murray Gold's back, so's the funny music.
I think I broke this multi-claw adaptable. What is it? Oh.
And I can already hear the counter-arguments. This is a kid's show, so why would comedic scenes be directed the same as they are in adult comedies? To which I would respond, 1, a lot of Doctor Who humor is clearly meant to appeal to adults. See all the sex jokes as reference.
I've come from the Doctor too.
Yes, but at a different point in time.
Unless there's two of them.
No. That's a whole different birthday.
Get a girlfriend, Jeff.
And 2, just because something is for kids, that doesn't mean it's automatically exonerated from any potential poor creative decisions. I would argue Marvel movies are for kids too, and even though they're far from perfect, even they don't employ funny music in the same way that Doctor Who does.
You know, you should come by Stark Tower sometime.
Thanks, but the last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem.
I didn't like this music even when I was a kid. And I'm sorry, but to me it just sucks the humor out of any scene it's inserted into like a vacuum. Murray Gold is a great composer, but I really don't understand why the show just can't move past him after all this time. And it's not just Murray Gold, it's, well, everything. Why does it feel like this show can't creatively move forwards? The classic series may have had its issues, but at least it was always evolving creatively. Every Doctor had a tonally distinct era. Hell, even within the scope of certain Doctor's eras, there are pronounced movements that totally reinvent the show's style. The first Doctor's early episodes feel nothing like his later ones. Same goes for the fourth Doctor and the seventh Doctor. To put things into perspective, New Who has been on the air for 19 years now. Think about how much classic Who changed in that same time frame. 1963 Doctor Who is not the same show as 1982 Doctor Who at all. And whilst it's true that television as a whole changed a lot across that period, I think it's bizarre that New Who has barely shifted stylistically across its entire run. Though I do have a theory for why this is the case. Here's where the second meaning of the word politics comes into play. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the Fitzroy Club. Let me take you back to the 1990s. Doctor Who is off the air, and control over the franchise essentially passes into the hands of the fans. The Fitzroy Club, also known as the Fitzroy Crowd, refers to an assortment of writers who essentially became the de facto faces of the fandom during this time, known for their Doctor Who novels, audio dramas, and even parodies. The Fitzroy Club got their name from the Fitzroy Tavern, a pub many of them frequented while brainstorming ideas for potential Doctor Who stories they may one day pursue. When the show was off the air, they were the keepers of the flame. Or in simpler terms, they were basically nerdy fanfiction writers who couldn't let Doctor Who die. But dedication is dedication. Not everyone who's considered part of the Fitzroy Club is actually confirmed to have been a regular at the bar, but there aren't many other names that tie them all together. A lot of them did contribute to the Virgin book series, but the Virgin Club might not necessarily have the best ring to it. Might be more accurate though. Zing! Who were they? I hear you asking? Well, if you happen to be a Doctor Who fan, you already know their names. Stephen Moffat, Chris Chibnall, Paul Cornell, Mark Gatiss, Nicholas Briggs, and of course, Russell T Davies, along with various other names you may also know. The point is, virtually everyone responsible for shaping the 2005 reboot into what it became was part of this clique. In all this time, control of Doctor Who has passed from Russell T Davies to Stephen Moffat to Chris Chibnall, and then back to Russell, with no outsiders being allowed in. Even people who weren't members of the original Fitzroy Club, like Murray Gold, have basically gained an honorable membership in just how much the show has become reliant on them. I think the cliquey nature of Doctor Who's upper management has led to some seriously toxic behind-the-scenes politics. It's been well documented that there have been many issues with Doctor Who's production over the years, perhaps most infamously is what happened with Series 1. Now, what actually went down when this season was being filmed is still somewhat unknown, but it has been confirmed by Russell himself that the first production block of the season was a nightmare. It's alleged that at one point extras were put in danger's way when the director wanted to get a shot of a flaming sofa flying at people, and after someone almost got killed, the shot wasn't even usable anyways. And if this is true, safety regulations being violated is only the tip of the iceberg. By all means, it seems like the second production block smoothed things over a little bit. However, according to one source I found, it was during this production block that Russell's inexperience with handling a sci-fi budget came to fruition, because he burned basically the entire season's budget on just the second episode, making the production of the rest of Series 1 not a blast. According to Christopher Eccleston, low-paid workers were constantly being mistreated by those running the show, and when he tried to report this to Doctor Who's extremely closed-off upper management, in his own words,
"I could see what was going on and reported it back, and I just got silence."
These aren't the only problems that plagued the production of this season. Of the 4 companions featured throughout the season, 3 of them are played by actors who were later accused of sexual misconduct. What a work environment. Now, for the sake of full transparency and not spreading slander, the accusations against John Barrowman are not to the same severity as those against Clark or Langley. Where their accusations are of the criminal variety, John Barrowman just seems to have no conception of boundaries.
So we get into Katie's trailer, and it's lit beautifully, so I took off all the clothes and I posed on every surface. Every time I would do a close-up, or it was her close-up, I would get the kids out and try to throw her off.
And I got in the front with the driver like this, and you know your windscreen wipers? Yeah. John used his body, or his part of his body, as the windscreen wiper, jumped on the bonnet of this car, pulled his trousers down and his pants, and did this. And you know what? I just went, I was kind of apologetic to the driver, and I kind of turned to the driver and I went, "Oh, he's so silly."
It seems like he thought being naked was the pinnacle of humor, and so he would take any excuse he could to take his dick out on set.
Hi, this is John Barrowman, and you're following me. You get to see what it takes to be Jack in Doctor Who. Am I naked in front of millions of viewers?
Still not great, but in the case of Noel Clarke, he's been accused of groping women and abusing his position of power to elicit sexual favors by at least 20 different individuals. There is no way to read this as just an innocent prank gone wrong. It seems like his behavior was not only predatory, but a pattern, and for a long time, he continued to get away with it. I'm not blaming Russell directly for this. I have no way of knowing how much he was aware of as showrunner, and I'll offer him the benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, He has to have been aware of what was going on with John. You can't be in charge of a television show and not know that one of your main cast members keeps showing other people their penis on set. I won't dwell on speculation, but I feel like there is a decent chance that one of the many things Christopher Eccleston complained to Russell about was Barrowman's behavior, which ultimately nothing was done about. Regardless of what the exact reason for his departure was, he did leave after only one season. And what did the BBC do in response to this? They blacklisted him, ruining his career in the UK for a time. They also went behind his back and publicly announced his exit, explaining that the reason he was leaving was because he didn't want to be typecast and because he didn't have the energy to play the part.
I agreed with Russell that I would go quietly and respectfully and I would look after the show, and then without saying anything to me, they announced that I was leaving. I was walking down the street and suddenly I got quite a lot of aggression. They created a quote and they attributed it to me, which said I was tired. And I didn't find it too tiring. I found it too tiring working with Russell and Phil and Julia. I didn't find it physically too tiring. When they said that, any other producer reading that would go, oh, well, we're not going to employ Chris Eccleston because he gets tired. So it was a lie.
Now, this whole too tired thing was a huge controversy. Eccleston called them out for making up a quote and then they printed a retraction, but the damage was done. His acting career had been badly damaged. And I believe the fallout from this drama manifested itself in one of Russell's scripts. There's a line from the 2005 Christmas special, the first episode after Chris's exit, that I am almost positive was a direct shot at him. In that episode, the Prime Minister of Britain destroys an alien spaceship that was trying to flee, which infuriates the Doctor. He confronts her, telling her that what she just did was murder, but she's having none of it.
That was murder. That was defense.
So he goes on the offensive and tells her that he could end her career in just 6 words.
Don't challenge me, Harriet Jones.
I could bring down your government with a single word.
I don't think you're quite capable of that.
No, you're right. Not a single word. Just 6.
And what are those 6 words?
Don't you think she looks tired?
Now that reminds me of something. What could it be?
Doctor, what was that? What did he say? What did you say, Doctor? Doctor!
I've heard numerous times that this was a reference to Margaret Thatcher, and that may well be true.
Unemployment and depression. Thank you, Margaret Thatcher.
However, the drama of Christopher's exit would have been looming over Russell just as he was writing this episode, and whether it was conscious or not, I think it may have influenced what he wrote.
You'd all love to see Christopher come back as the Doctor, right? See? Now, what would have to happen for that to become a reality?
Sack Russell T Davies, sack Jane Tranter, sack Phil Collinson, sack Julie Gardner, and I'll come back. So can you arrange that?
With Christopher gone, the Fitzroy Club could go back to having uncontested control over Doctor Who, with absolutely no one objecting to it. And the controversies continued. During Stephen Moffat's stint as showrunner, Doctor Who managed to land acclaimed author Neil Gaiman as a guest writer, and he wrote 2 episodes, the first of which is commonly regarded as one of the season's best, but the second of which kind of sucks, much to everyone's surprise. Neil Gaiman himself doesn't seem too happy with how the episode turned out, stating in a chat with The Telegraph that somebody who was running the show at the time heavily modified his script against his will and effectively ruined it. And the only person that it really would make sense for him to be talking about here is Stephen Moffat. Apparently, many of the episode's important character beats ended up being cut, like the Doctor's reluctance to allow children on board the TARDIS, which the episode barely addresses. I mean, if you watch Nightmare in Silver, it kind of seems like there were some genuinely good ideas here, but they are buried under layers and layers of bad pacing and cringe, which of course begs the question, why would you take creative control away from Neil Gaiman after managing to land him? And how many other guest writers has this happened to? If it wasn't already clear, a lot of the problems I've talked about were a direct result of placing so much power into just one individual. I don't want to make the argument that the studio should interfere more with Doctor Who, but the way that, since New Who's inception, every single creative decision has always fallen on one man's shoulders has been very problematic. suck. When Stephen Moffat was showrunner, he was stretched so thin between this, Sherlock, and at one point The Adventures of Tintin, that he started having to hand in first drafts of his scripts to be shot. Have you ever wondered why Let's Kill Hitler is so fucking bad? That's why. The production on that episode was so scuffed that parts of it were filmed a month before transmission. It should never get to the point where objectively unfinished scripts are put into production just because everything fell onto one person. And it's not just Let's Kill Hitler, it's alleged that the series finale was also a first draft script, which, if you've seen it, adds up. And I'm about to go on a bit of a tangent here, but the entire arc of Series 6 ends up being ruined because of this. For reference, Series 6 kicks off with a mystery. A future version of the Doctor is killed, and over the course of the entire series, the Doctor tries and fails to think of a way to avoid this fate. Because of how important of a person he is, his death becomes a fixed point in time, and should he try to avoid it, time itself will disintegrate. At one point, he comes across something called a tesselecta, which is basically a robot version of someone with many people inside controlling it. And so naturally, a lot of people on the internet theorized that the Doctor we saw on the beach was a tesselecta, but not only did this seem too obvious, but the show went out of its way to tell us this was not a duplicate of the Doctor.
Maybe he's a clone or a duplicate or something.
That most certainly is the Doctor. And he is most certainly dead.
Plus, the solution couldn't possibly be this easy. I mean, if it was, then how come the Doctor hadn't thought of it by now?
One last trip, eh?
It seemed like Moffat had kind of written himself into a corner. Come the finale, and the Doctor finally gives in, accepting that he'll have to die to restore balance to the universe. Until, crammed into the last 2 minutes of the episode, it's revealed that he actually did survive after all. How?
Look into my eye. The tesselecta. A doctor in a doctor's suit.
This is such a nonsensical cop-out that I genuinely think Stephen Moffat came up with it at the last minute. Not only does it contradict information we'd already been given, but the whole reason that the Doctor had to die supposedly was because his death was a fixed point in time. We were told directly that if he doesn't die, all of reality will break, and we actually see that come to pass at the beginning of the episode.
Fixed points can be rewritten. No, they can't. Of course they can't. Who told you?
The clocks never tick. What happened to time?
A woman.
Thank you, Stephen. So, how is he able to get out of this by just being in a robot suit of himself? How does that solve the issue? He still doesn't die. It's almost like the episode moves the goalpost to try to make this make sense.
Time said I had to be on that beach, so I dressed for the occasion. Barely got singed in that boat.
No, Time didn't say you had to be on the beach. Time said you had to die. That was like the whole thing. If all you had to do was be on the beach, then why was this ever a problem? The only way you can make this make sense is to argue that it was always supposed to be the tesselecta Doctor on the beach, and it was never supposed to be where he actually died. But hold on, if that's the case, then why was this a fixed point in time in the first place? I thought fixed points in time are only supposed to be like super important events. It doesn't make sense. There's no way to make it make sense. I'm not alone in suspecting that Stephen Moffat came up with this mystery before he actually figured out the solution to it, ran out of time, and had to quickly pen a super half-assed conclusion that doesn't actually make any sense, and no one stopped him. Why did no one stop him? But if you're not convinced that this is actually true, I'd say look no further than the beach scene from the finale, which was clearly shot on green screen. Now, if this season had actually been written out ahead of time, why wouldn't they have just shot this 30-second scene when they were actually on the beach during the season's second production block? Likely answer, this scene had not been written yet, which pretty much confirms he was coming up with this as he went. The reason I'm harping on this so much is because I think it's a perfect example of what happens when you give one man way too much to do and not enough time to do it. And also that man happens to be Stephen Moffat. Then we come to showrunner number 3, Chris Chibnall, and it's more of the same again. By his own admission, the Series 11 finale was a first draft script because he felt too overworked to put any more time into it. He's also retroactively admitted that he thinks this episode is bad. Yes, we're getting to a point where the production of Doctor Who is so scuffed that showrunners are admitting that their own finales suck. But forget about the scripts, what about the visuals? This same rushed production that's affected the show from the beginning remains on display throughout Chibnall's entire era. You can't be serious. I commonly hear people say that Chibnall's era is the best looking of the revival, and this is due in large part to the fact that the filming equipment got an upgrade. Seasons 11 through 13 are shot with anamorphic lenses, which squeezes the light as it enters the camera in such a way as to produce all kinds of lens flares and other distorted lighting effects. On top of that, these episodes are shot with a much more tight depth of field, which makes the images look more dynamic and three-dimensional. So yeah, in terms of the raw footage they captured for these seasons, it's definitely the best they ever got. Or at least it was when the equipment was being used properly, because it seems like the crew struggled to keep up. I don't know if they didn't have enough time to train with the new lenses or what, but there are a lot of scenes that just look poorly executed, namely interior scenes which frequently look distorted and fish-eyed, and a lot of shots in this era are noticeably out of focus. But where the Chibnall era really drops the ball is in its post-production. Firstly, I don't like how these seasons are color corrected. I noticed while editing that Series 11 tends to suck the saturation out of everything and make it all look grayish, whereas Series 12 and 13 typically add very intense tints over everything, whether it be bluish, greenish, yellowish, or whatever. And in my opinion, neither looks that visually appealing. This era also really struggles in the editing department.
Kane! What happened? Through me. Are you okay? They've got the... Get me back up there!
Legend of the Sea Devils has fight scenes that are so laughably bad that I genuinely think that they're unfinished.
How would you prefer to be addressed?
Where is it?
Mr. Where is it? Lord, where is it? Why are you trashing this place?
This shit doesn't even look professional, man. And this is Doctor Who we're talking about. I expect it to look bad.
No! I just caught a whopper.
Here's a shot from Legend of the Sea Devils of the Doctor skimming stones. Okay, genuinely, why couldn't they just take a shot of someone actually skimming stones? Like you like a PNG of a stone, just what kind of production hell leads to this being necessary? Then there's episodes like Orphan 55. This entire episode looks like they ran out of time on their production block and tried to do the whole thing as fast as they possibly could. But this is nothing new. Remember that moment from Series 2 I played at the beginning of the video? That was also the result of this episode being stuck in production hell and running out of time. The only difference with Chibnall's era is that these problems have only gotten worse. And then there's the commonly complained about issue of too many extreme close-ups. I have seen some people try to defend Chibnall's era by arguing that this is all stylistic. Like, the over-reliance on close-ups is actually just an intelligent directorial decision to make audiences uncomfortable. Except that most of the time when close-ups are used, they're in scenes where you're clearly not supposed to feel uncomfortable.
I left my family to try and save my family.
You're making me miss my family.
Don't ever take them for granted.
Like, were we supposed to feel uncomfortable during Jodie's final monologue? Are we supposed to feel uncomfortable like half the time? There are many episodes of the show that came out on a lower budget with better shot composition. It can be done. The Girl in the Fireplace is a great example. It makes great use of intense lighting and dynamic framing. This came out in 2006. I'm sorry, but Chibnall's era just doesn't have an excuse to look this bad. I can't tell if the reason the show looks like this is because Chibnall wanted it to, or there simply wasn't enough time to properly storyboard these episodes. But either way, if there were enough checks and balances in place, this would never have happened. This is all my way of saying that way too much of a workload is dumped onto every showrunner, and it seems like production on Doctor Who seasons has consistently been nightmarish since day one, and something needs to change. We were told after Moffat left, and again after Chibnall left, that it was very difficult for the BBC to find a replacement because apparently no one wanted the job. That's how stressful of a position it is. The workload is so high that no one wants to run one of the most popular shows on British TV. At least assuming that this is actually true, as opposed to the alternative being that there were many talented writers who would have loved the job, but the BBC never asked anyone outside of the very small clique of writers that they consider eligible, and I'm kind of inclined to believe that this might be the case because I don't know if I actually believe that there was no qualified writer on the entire planet that wanted this job. There has always been a certain degree of elitism on display in terms of how writers are selected for Doctor Who. If you're American, for instance, don't even bother sending in a script.
We have never let an American write Doctor Who, and if we were going to, we wouldn't start with you.
Simple enough, thank you would have been sufficient.
It's also a bit of a boys' club up in the Doctor Who writers' room. In the past few years, guest writers have consistently outshone those who are actually running the show. For example, Maxine Alderton is responsible for penning both The Haunting of Villa Diodati and The Village of Angels, two episodes that most people can agree are the two single best episodes of the 13th Doctor's entire run. And both of them run circles around any of Chibnall's solo material. Personally, I'm kind of partial to Eve of the Daleks, but I know that's an unpopular opinion, so. And yet, come the next series, there's only going to be one episode written by a guest writer. Every other episode is written by either Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat. And yes, it's entirely possible that they could pen great scripts and it could be a great series, but in my personal opinion, digging up its past is not what this show needs right now. And believe me, this show has become very reliant on digging up its past, whether it be nostalgia baiting. Hey, remember this thing from the past?
If someone who knew the future pointed out a child to you and told you that that child would grow up totally evil.
Or repeating tried and true formulas. And this is my way of tying everything back to that central question I asked at the beginning: what kind of show is Doctor Who? I mean, really, what is this show trying to achieve? There is no right or wrong answer, but to me, Doctor Who is a show that is made to keep changing. Experiment with new ideas and never stay in the same place for too long. The idea of change is literally baked into its main character. It's a show designed to keep going forever. It's this that sets it apart from any other show on television. Even long-running soap operas, which generally stick to one genre or idea throughout their entire run. Maybe not every episode will land as well as the last one, but you know what? That's good, as long as the show never stops trying new things. And the fact that the show seems to be moving backwards, to me, is problematic. You can give me flack for saying this all you want, but honestly, on paper, Chibnall's first season as showrunner, Series 11, was more of a step in the right direction than the 60th, an opinion I'll probably get murdered for having. Now, let me clarify what I mean by that. I think Series 11 was bad, worse than the 60th by a lot. However, the concept behind this season was great, and it was only in execution where it faltered. Think about what this season was trying to do. All new villains throughout the entire season, meaning no recognizable faces returned. More weight being put onto history and social issues. An entirely new look, feel, and sound for the show that was unlike anything that had come before. A break from every single female character being a kinky dominatrix femme fatale who slaps the Doctor around but then falls in love with him and her whole life revolves around being in love with him. Oh, Moffat, you horny bastard. I really wish that this had succeeded, because this is what I wanted from Doctor Who following Moffat's exit. I wanted it to do something completely different. It tried, failed, and then ran back into familiar territory with its tail between its legs in Series 12.
Oops.
I'm gonna reiterate it, Doctor Who is a sandbox show. You can do literally anything with it. Any genre, any theme, any message, anything. Part of the reason I was put off the show for a while is because it felt like we were getting the same thing week after week. If you really look at it, it feels like 90% of episodes correspond to a given formula that's been repeated many times before. We got the subversion of history episodes, we got the base under siege episodes, we got the aliens invade London and everyone's shocked somehow, even though this is the 1000th time it's happened. Episodes. I can't count the amount of Doctor Who episodes that begin with the Doctor landing somewhere and being like, "Hello, companion. This is the cool place that I want to show you. What's this? This isn't how it's supposed to be. We must investigate by getting captured. Don't worry. They won't guard us." The rare episode that doesn't correspond to one of the pre-established formulas feels like such a breath of fresh air. That's why Wild Blue Yonder was my favorite of the specials, because it gave me what I wanted. A genuinely interesting science fiction idea told in a unique way. I truly think if you had to boil Doctor Who down to one central purpose, it's to explore. And I don't just mean the Doctor exploring the universe in the TARDIS, I mean that the purpose of the show is to explore storytelling, explore different genres, different perspectives, different hypothetical worlds, just to be boundless. Or at least as boundless as a show on this budget can be. But here's the thing, where you have true creativity, budget shouldn't matter. So this is the part where I bring up another show and suggest that Doctor Who should take notes from it. And there are a lot that come to mind, like Star Trek, The Twilight Zone, or even Black Mirror. But at their core, none of those shows are really similar to Doctor Who. Weirdly enough, I think the show that Doctor Who could take the most inspiration from is NBC's Community. Yes, a sitcom. Let me explain. Community is a show famous for changing up its genre almost every episode despite having, well, a sitcom's budget. From mafia spoofs to paintball wars to conspiracy webs to high science fiction concepts.
Just so you know, Jeff, you were now creating 6 different timelines.
Of course I am, Abed.
Despite being a sitcom failing in the ratings with an ever-dwindling budget, the show just could not stop giving because its creator cared that much. The similarities don't even end there. I mean, many of Doctor Who's most famous writers started as sitcom writers, and there's even a running joke within Community that one of the main characters is obsessed with a show called Inspector Spacetime, which is a clear allusion to Doctor Who. And then they did an episode in 2013 that predicted Doctor Who's future perfectly multiple times.
Wait, was there a female inspector?
Yes, and everyone hates her. Not because they're sexist, because she sucks.
That is so great.
And the episode guest stars Matt Lucas, who would go on to be a Doctor Who companion a few years later. Do the writers of Community have a time machine? This has nothing to do with anything, by the way. I've just been waiting for an opportunity to talk about this for years. So what point am I trying to make here? If Community could do it, Doctor Who should be able to do it too. This is a show that understands it's not just about doing as many ideas as possible, but doing them right. Part of what makes Community's genre-bending episodes work so well is that they're willing to push things to the limits. They change how the episodes are directed to reflect the genre they're replicating. Like, for instance, when doing an episode based on crime thrillers like Seven, they make the episode visually look like one of those movies.
How many photographs do people need?
Whereas Doctor Who rarely ever does that. It'll plop him in a new environment, but the episode will be directed same as ever. I know Doctor Who's not a comedy, but there's so much potential to have fun with the medium of film that the show just isn't experimenting with. Call this a radical overhaul if you will, but I think every Doctor Who episode should feel different from the last. I also think the show should make an effort to subvert its core tenets every now and again. A great example of an episode like this is Blink, an episode that barely features the Doctor, or Flatline, an episode where the Doctor and Clara switch places. As time has gone on, I think the show has gotten more and more scared to change up its core chemistry. And that's a crime because there's so much potential. Like, I'll just spitball some random examples. A Bottle episode where the Doctor and company get lost in the TARDIS corridors and can't find their way out. Not Journey to the Center of the TARDIS because that sucked. What about an episode where the TARDIS translation matrix breaks and now the Doctor and companions can no longer understand the alien species around them, leading to an Arrival type situation? What if the Doctor's new companion turns out to be a complete psychopath and tries to steal the TARDIS for nefarious purposes? What about an episode of the show that's directed exactly like an episode from the 80s would have been? Like, I mean, down to the music, editing, opening, everything. That would be peak. Russell's already done that and it's a sin, so he can do it again. Then there's just basic things about the show that recently have been coming off as a little lazy, like the fact that every single companion is a human from the current year. Why can't we get any companions who are aliens, or companions from the past or future? Classic Who had some really interesting dynamics between companions that came from radically different cultures. And why are there no recurring locations besides Earth? Wouldn't it be cool if there was some alien planet that we routinely visited throughout the seasons and saw it change due to the Doctor's influence over time? Again, even classic Who had some locations like Peladon that we visited multiple times and saw the effects of the Doctor's last visit in action. Even if you don't love all of my ideas, I hope that I've conveyed to you that the show is barely scratching the surface of what it could do. As I've highlighted in this video, there are deeper issues with Doctor Who and its production that I think still need to be addressed. Problems that I think are a result of the show refusing to regenerate. Because if I'm being honest, I think it's been clinging on to its past for a little too long now. That doesn't mean that an 80s episode wouldn't be cool though, that's the exception. That would be awesome. It may be true that the show is, in many ways, on trial just as it was in 1986, but history need not repeat itself, the outcome need not be the same so long as the show keeps moving forward. And in that regard, I am slightly concerned. In some ways, the bi-generation may have been a good metaphor for the state of the show. Instead of moving forwards, it's kind of moving sideways. Sure, it might try some new things in its new season, but at its core, it's the same people and the same style as ever. And personally, I think it's time for the show to move on and accept real change. So what does the future have in store for the Doctor? Who knows? Who knows? But hey, when all is said and done, even if the show isn't exactly what I want it to be, at least we still have it, right? It's been with us for 60 years. Here's to another 60. Maybe in that span of time there will finally be an episode set in Canada. Maybe. Maybe not. We'll see. Hey there. It's been 2 months. Let's talk about that. In the time since I've made this video, a new season of Doctor Who has come and gone, and I have a lot to say about it. Honestly, this video is long enough, so why don't we just... That seems ominous. I don't know, maybe it'll be relevant later. Let's just move on and get right into the first episode of the new season, Space Babies.
Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space baby! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies! Space babies!
Opening the season with Space Babies was a mistake. Maybe just including it at all was a mistake.
But we've been waiting for an awfully long time.
Russell has made it clear he wants this new season to attract new young adult viewers. Yet this episode is so juvenile that I genuinely can't see anyone above the age of 12 being able to get anything out of it, really. It genuinely looks and feels like one of those talking dog movies.
Why, you rotten little mutts! Get them!
I'm Captain Puppy, and I kept the station running for Mummy and Daddy.
So basically the plot of this episode is that the Doctor and Ruby find a bunch of space babies who are being terrorized by a real-life bogeyman that's made of actual boogers.
All of this is bogies.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Then it later turns out that the computer that grew the babies also created the bogeyman because babies need stories after all.
Babies need fiction, they need stories, they need monsters.
They invented the bogeyman.
For the baby.
The space baby.
So then the Doctor risks his life to save the bogeyman so that it can go on to terrorize the children another day. I get that the goal behind this ending was to subvert common story tropes by saying that the scary monster is actually just misunderstood, but I don't know if the ending really works because it seems to contradict what we've already seen. The bogeyman clearly chases and terrorizes these children in a manner that, at least from what we see, seems to put them in danger. That combined with the fact that it's debatable whether this thing is even sentient, being that it was made out of boogers by a computer, makes the Doctor's decision to rescue it seem slightly questionable.
No, that's what you do, Jocelyn. You save them all.
I think this would have worked better if we'd been shown that the bogeyman never actually presented any threat, and we got to see the babies actually get over their fear of it, but that beat is entirely skipped. We just cut to an ending scene where the babies, for whatever reason, are no longer afraid of it, even though it was designed specifically to scare them, and then it howls like a wolf, because I guess it does that. At least it has a cool ending where they blast off into space with poo. Also, the episode's kind of a clunky metaphor for the anti-abortion movement.
So, the planet down below refused to stop the babies being born, but once they're born, they don't look after them.
It's a very strange planet.
I could elaborate on parts of this episode that don't really make sense, like the bit when the Doctor is getting sucked out of an airlock, and yet when he lets go, he just gets sucked directly backwards instead of through the hole in the hull, but it's becoming increasingly clear that these episodes aren't even really trying to be what you'd call realistic, so there's no point. It's funny that I went on about how Church on Ruby Road is very reminiscent of Rose, because Space Babies is very reminiscent of the end of the world. The Doctor and his new companion land on a space station set far in humanity's future, meet characters with bad CGI mouths, and fight against a mysterious, monstrous villain which turns out to be a red herring for the real baddie. There's even a scene in Space Babies that's almost identical to one from the end of the world, where the Doctor provides Ruby with the ability to phone her mom.
We're out of range. Just a bit.
Tell you what, with a little bit of jiggery pokery. There you go.
Mum?
Oh, what is it? What's wrong? What have I done now? Is there something wrong?
No, I'm fine.
My mum, she's long gone now.
Can I see your phone? One phone call.
Well, what is it now?
Mum?
Yes, Mum, obviously.
They even end on the same joke.
I think that's amazing. You want to see the bill?
That's the best signal ever. How much that cost?
Except the scene is far less effective here than it was in the end of the world, because in that episode, Rose goes through a crisis, realizing that she's just abandoned her life and run away with a complete stranger.
I just sort of hitched a lift with this man. Didn't even think about it. Don't even know who he is.
The conversation she has with her mother serves as a bridge between the world she's left behind and the world she's in now.
5 billion years later, my mum's dead.
Bundle of laughs you are.
The episode actually tackles how jarring it would be for her to be in a foreign environment like this, whereas Space Babies more or less glosses over everything. Ruby barely even feels like she's a presence in this episode. When the Doctor gives her a TARDIS key, it doesn't feel earned the way it has in the past, because we've barely seen Ruby do anything. It's actually funny that I went out of my way to use the end of the world as an example of when Doctor Who does camp right, because this episode is a perfect example of when Doctor Who does camp wrong.
I'm so scared.
I think the only part of this episode I really get anything out of is the part of it that sets up Ruby's mystery box storyline.
Doctor, it's snowing.
It's like a memory just came through.
Anytime she thinks of her mother, somehow she's able to make it snow, no matter where they are. And on top of that, the Doctor's memory of the night he saw Ruby's mother seems to change itself somehow. What's going on here? Does she have the ability to rewrite time? Color me intrigued. Can't say I liked this episode, though.
When was the last time that you had a hug?
Never.
This is what the devil plays before he goes to sleep.
If any episode from this season is a perfect showcase of Russell's new vision for Doctor Who, it's this one. This episode is pretty much nothing but vibes. It doesn't have that much structure. It was advertised as a Beatles episode, but it did not end up being that at all. It was more so just an episode where the Doctor and Ruby ran away from the Maestro repeatedly. Oh yeah, speaking of the Maestro, they are a villain that wants to rid the world of music. The best scenes in this episode are the ones at the beginning when we get to see everyone at Abbey Road Studios having had their talent sucked out.
I've got a dog, he's called Fred. My dog is alive, he's not dead. I love my dog.
Honestly, that song easily could have made the White Album. So, does it work? I mean, it's fun.
Music battle.
I'm kind of disappointed that more of the runtime wasn't dedicated to the Doctor and Ruby conversing with all the people at Abbey Road, because not much really happens in this episode apart from an extended action sequence and a lot of exposition. There aren't even any Beatles songs in it. You cheated me.
Disgusting.
The climax basically boils down to two people playing musical instruments at each other while music notes fly out, which is something I've seen like a million times before and in ways that were far more creative than this. And like with the toy maker, the way the maestro is defeated ends up being really anticlimactic. Apparently all you need to do to defeat them is to just play a secret chord, which the maestro makes sure to let the Doctor know.
Who found the lost chord? Which means a different combination of notes would banish you.
And John Lennon and Paul McCartney walk up to a piano that has some floating music notes above it, don't question why the music notes are there, and then they just find the chord. And, you know, that's it. The lost chord is just a C major chord. That's like the most generic chord it could have been. They're at Abbey Road Studios. There would have been people playing C major chords left and right. Why didn't any of those banish the maestro? I mean, I don't even know why I'm harping on about this. It's obvious there wasn't much attention to detail here. The Doctor supposedly plays most of this chord in a previous scene, but the notes he plays are completely different. Even the notes described in the narration are wrong.
A second, and a third, and fourth, and fifth, and you put them together.
Which, by the way, would sound like this. If this show keeps spitting on music theory, I am going to spit on it. Even though there are little moments here and there that I think are done well, it's all kind of bogged down by poor characterization again. There's a scene in this episode where the Doctor and Ruby return to modern day and see that the entire world has been destroyed because there's no more music.
I think without music, the human race goes sour. Without any way of expressing a broken heart, they go to war.
It's very Disney. And yet the episode barely focuses on how seeing something like this affected Ruby emotionally. It's played for one beat and then swiftly moved on from. Space Babies ends with a scene of her reuniting with her mum.
Tell your mum not to slap me.
But I think that scene would have worked a lot better at the end of this episode since she came so close to losing her, instead of the dance party we get instead. I think this dance party is a perfect representation for how the show is moving closer and closer to pantomime. Like, is this actually supposed to be happening in universe? I don't really know. At least we get a cameo from the goat. And again, I'm not against the idea of a super over-the-top musical episode of the show, but if you want to make a musical episode, make a musical episode. Set it on Planet Music or whatever. Don't just take a normal episode that's supposed to take place in the real world and then just randomly saddle a music video onto the end of it. The thing is, I think the pieces for a great ending are all here. It just wasn't really arranged properly. Okay, picture this. The way to defeat the maestro isn't just to play a random arbitrary set of notes, but rather to outperform them. And I think you could get really creative with it, like if you're determined to keep the instrument battle with music notes flying at each other, you could have the Doctor intentionally weaponize harmony, like he could play notes that are dissonant to what the maestro is playing to cause them harm. But despite all the Doctor's best efforts, it seems that he cannot overpower the maestro. Until we hear the faint sounds of someone playing the piano and singing along. The Doctor and the maestro turn simultaneously to see Paul McCartney, shortly joined by John Lennon on guitar. Despite the fact that the maestro had sucked their talent out, just hearing this music blaring from down the hall was enough to give them the inspiration they needed to pick back up their instruments. And then, one by one, all the musicians at Abbey Road hear it and come in to reclaim what's theirs. And that's the part where you could include an actual Beatles song. Thus, we'd get the world's most legendary jam featuring the Beatles, Cilla Black, and everyone in between. And that's what it would take to defeat the maestro. Talent, the very thing they were trying to get rid of. The ending in its current state feels like it's trying to go for something similar, but it's just so underplayed that it barely even comes across. I hate to say it, but I kind of feel like the script could have used another draft or two. For most people, Boom was where this season finally found its footing, and it's not hard to see why. This is Stephen Moffat's triumphant return to the show after 7 years away, and he makes sure to let you know that by constantly referencing his era every 5 minutes.
Fish fingers and custard.
It is the first episode we've gotten in a while that truly feels like it isn't rehashing any old ideas or formulas.
Harry, I'm standing on a landmine.
It's trying to do something wholly new, basically a bottle episode, and I think it actually pulls it off. Moffat actually takes the time to make sure the episode is paced well. There is a gradual rising tension throughout the whole thing as the landmine gets closer and closer to exploding and more characters are introduced one at a time. The episode basically ends on a deus ex machina where the power of love is able to overpower the programming of a bunch of computers, which doesn't necessarily make sense, but I'll actually give it a pass in this case because it's emotionally satisfying. The reason I criticized all those plot points that seems to come completely out of left field or had no explanation in previous episodes is because there it just felt lazy and like the episode was running away from all these potentially interesting questions it had raised. At the very least here, it feels like the conclusion of the story is building off of pieces that had already been established, like the fact that this father was killed and the last thing he thought about as he died was his daughter.
My next of kin, Splice. She's my daughter and I'm exclusively responsible for her. Please!
Leave a message at the tone.
Kiss, kiss.
So when his consciousness is uploaded to a weapons manufacturer's computer systems, he's able to dismantle the entire thing just to protect his daughter.
Virus alert. Virus out.
Kiss, kiss.
Kiss.
Kiss. Kiss.
It's corny, but cute. And Moffat's cutesiness in general works well in small doses.
What survives of us is love.
This is yet further proof that Moffat is a great Doctor Who writer when he's not the showrunner. So all in all, this is the first episode of the season I have positive feelings towards.
What is social distancing and why do we need to do it?
73 Yards is an episode I want to focus on because it's what I've been asking for from the show for a long time. The Doctor steps on a wire and somehow breaks some kind of ancient Welsh magic circle thing, which causes a curse to be put on him and Ruby. He disappears and doesn't show up at all until the end of the episode, and Ruby, left all alone, notices that there's a woman who's always 73 yards from her, and anytime someone talks to this woman, they will immediately grow to hate Ruby.
Disengage.
Even her own mother.
What's she saying? Mum, whatever she's saying, just don't... Mum, don't listen to her! Please don't do this to me, Mum! Mum, don't do this to me, Mum!
And this just keeps going. The episode follows Ruby as she grows old. You can tell she's old because she wears glasses. And this mysterious woman never stops following her. Oh, and Britain elects a fascist sex offender as prime minister. Conceptually, this feels like something we've never seen from the show before to an even greater extent than Boom. Sure, if you wanted to split hairs, I guess you could argue it's kind of similar to Turn Left. The Doctor's gone and the world turns to shit. We follow his companion over the course of years as Britain becomes fascist and her relationship with her family deteriorates. And the episode ends with her dying in such a way as to change the past and restore the main timeline. Okay, they're very similar episodes, but still, this episode's execution is what makes it stand out for me. It actually takes the time to properly explore this idea and make it its own. I love the way the episode has no title sequence. I love the way that it's shot. Doctor Who is finally pulling off close-up shots properly. I'm so proud to see it. However, the most controversial thing about this episode is its ending. We find out that the mysterious woman was Ruby all along, which is never really explained. Then Ruby somehow alters the past and prevents the Doctor from stepping on the wire, which is also never really explained. And then the episode just ends. We find out nothing about this curse, why it happened, or how Ruby broke free of it. We don't even find out what Ruby said to all those people to make them hate her. And a lot of people hate this. And I wouldn't say that I love it either, necessarily, but this is the one and only case where I think that it kind of arguably works to withhold answers from the viewer. The reason is because here, it's arguably a theme of the episode that this curse is beyond our comprehension, and the lack of answers makes it more creepy and mysterious. It's kind of like a folk horror film in that. That's not me saying that the episode would be worse if it made sense, but the episode's so well done that it's enjoyable either way, especially when Ruby starts weaponizing the woman against the Prime Minister.
And 50 minutes later, Roger Ap William resigned from the office of Prime Minister, refusing to give any reasons.
However, as a counter-argument, I will point out that Turn Left also leaves things very mysterious. We never really find out much about the people who were after Donna, or how they can somehow change people's past decisions with a beetle thing, but we did know how Donna defeated them. They were somehow able to influence Donna's past to prevent her from ever meeting the Doctor, leading to his death. So to defeat them, she's able to go back in time and sacrifice her life to cause a traffic jam, forcing past Donna to turn left and restore the primary timeline. The episode is still left mysterious, but the ending is a little more satisfying because the resolution comes about as the result of our main character's sacrifice, instead of just kind of happening on its own for reasons unknown. And I think Russell did kind of miss an opportunity to make the ending connect up to what we'd already seen in a satisfying way. It seems like future Ruby is somehow telepathically sending a message of "don't step" to her past self.
Is she?
Who?
What, over there?
All right, Ruby. All right.
Oh, no, don't step.
But this, of course, doesn't explain why everybody else reacted the way they did when they talked to her. However, if the message had been "step away" instead, then you could argue maybe she was implanting that idea into all of their heads and that's why they ran away. An idea that doesn't work nearly as well with the phrase "don't step." So yeah, this episode could have been a little more intuitive, but I feel like there was some actual intent behind the decision to leave things muddled here, whereas in other episodes it just comes off as feeling kind of lazy. So all in all, this is a massive W for the new season. Dot and Bubble is another episode that kind of tries to throw off the traditional Doctor Who formula, which I like. It's basically a Black Mirror episode with the Doctor just popping in and out every now and again. The episode centers on this rich kids society that are all obsessed with social media.
Dot and Bubble.
Hi there, Lindsay. Such a super day.
Turn left. Forward.
Which is targeted by a bunch of mysterious slugs that seem to be killing everyone, until it turns out the slugs were created by the AI that runs the society because it's grown to hate them. It's an interesting idea, and like the last few episodes, this one feels fresh, it's well-paced, but it doesn't really make sense. Like, it's not really clear why the AI decides to kill all these kids with a bunch of slow, inefficient slugs when it's shown to be capable of killing on its own. It's also not really clear where the slugs came from in the first place, but by this point I wasn't really expecting like airtight logic in these episodes, so whatever. But the part of this episode that everyone talks about is the ending, where it's revealed that the annoying rich kids were actually racist all along, which I called, by the way. I called it. I saw it coming, so I'm proud of myself.
You, sir, are not one of us. You were kind, although it was your duty to save me, obviously.
And I like this twist, and I like how it's actually woven into the episode before this point, so that you can go back and view it in a whole new light once you realize that these people are even more shitty than you thought they were.
Just give him a shot, okay? I think he's not as stupid as he looks.
However, one thing I will point out is that this episode, again, is clearly based on Black Mirror, but usually in a Black Mirror episode, when it presents a new idea or piece of technology, it shines a very positive light on it initially, and then gradually throughout the episode, it will peel back more and more layers until you see that this thing is terrifying. It encourages the audience to look at the issue from multiple perspectives, how it could be viewed as utopian and how it could be viewed as dystopian. In this episode, this society is clearly shitty and awful from the jump.
I don't know how to walk.
What do you mean?
I don't know how to walk without the arrows.
You don't know how to walk?
Without the arrows.
You don't know how to walk without the arrows.
There's never a point where anything is portrayed in an even remotely positive light, so the episode feels a little flatter than a Black Mirror episode might. Like, it basically just goes from rich people suck and social media is rotting your brain to rich people suck and social media is rotting your brain and they're racist. I think the episode might have worked better if it managed to make the society actually seem utopian in some way at first and then peeled back more layers as it went. But still, the episode's decent.
powerful anti-grav cycle combination device.
Anti-grav? I thought the word gravity became mavity. Russell?
Sack Russell T. Davies.
Gay!
This is the only episode of the season written by new writers, and what do you know? It's pretty decent. Best pacing of the season, best character work of the season, just a thoroughly enjoyable episode. Who'da thunk it? Okay, again, it's not perfect. It does feel like it's recycling an episode formula that's been done to death. Alien shapeshifters are invading human history. The ending also doesn't make sense again, but like, fuck it, I'm not even... And the romance at the center of the episode, aka the Doctor's crush on Jonathan Groff, feels a tad rushed to me, and also a little bizarre considering that Jonathan Groff's character is a murderer, so why would the Doctor be, like, into that?
It says you're hot. Does it? I'm sorry. No, it's broken.
I'm honestly just not a huge fan of the Doctor being horny in general.
Squeeze into a skirt that's just a little bit too tight.
I've always preferred it when he's depicted as asexual, but there are enough positives in this episode for me to look past all that. And we owe it all to the fact that Russell T. Davies got in a public argument with the creators of Loki. Maybe he should get into more public arguments so that we can get more episodes written by guests. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that around the time this episode aired, there was a lot of discourse about the fact that the 15th Doctor cries a lot. In fact, he cries in literally every single episode this season, except for 73 Yards, which he's barely even in. Now, I think I know what Russell was going for with this. The point is supposed to be that the 15th Doctor is more in touch with his emotions than previous incarnations, and he lets his emotions spill out. I understand and appreciate that side of things, though I think it would have made a lot of sense to make the 15th Doctor a more stoic incarnation. Why? Because he's established as the healed version of the 14th Doctor capable of controlling his emotions.
How many died down there?
You can't save everyone.
We're Time Lords. We're doing rehab out of order.
The only time that Russell conveyed to the audience that the 14th Doctor is broken inside without just having another character say it was the time we saw him have a meltdown. So I think it would have worked really well if we saw the 15th Doctor, in contrast to that, as an incarnation who's capable of keeping everything under control, as opposed to having seemingly even more meltdowns than the 14th Doctor did. At one point getting so emotionally distraught that he decides to take out his anger on a bunch of baddies by condemning them to a slow and cruel death.
How long do they live for?
They have a lifespan of 600 years.
Good. It's a long time to suffer.
Also, just in general, showing him cry every episode does kind of lessen its impact. There are moments coming up in the finale that I think would have hit a lot harder if, we hadn't already seen him lose it in every single episode up to that point. People accused the 10th Doctor of being weepy and over-emotional, but he only cried, 4 times throughout his entire tenure in the role? The 10th Doctor's emotions were usually a lot more muted and subtle, which, and I know this is subjective, I think works a lot better for a character as old and weathered as the Doctor. I've always thought that there are certain core traits of the Doctor it's important for every incarnation to have, and one of them is to impart a sense of authority and stoicism, which I just don't know if I'm getting from 15 that much. It also really doesn't help that for the last 5 episodes we've looked at, he wasn't the one who saved the day in any of them. His relationship with Ruby also seems a little one-note to me. They never come into any conflict, something that was really effective at generating drama in previous seasons.
Don't you dare lump me in with the rest of all the little humans that you think are so tiny and silly and predictable.
All of this paints the picture of a Doctor who, at least at this point, isn't as fleshed out as I would like him to be. I don't have much to say about Legend of Ruby Sunday because it's basically just set up for the finale. For most of the episode, Ruby's trying to figure out who her mom is.
It's Ruby Road.
In 2004?
There she is.
That is more than just a glitch. It's like she's shadowed.
But then everything gets sidetracked when a villain from Classic Who called Sutek shows up, and it turns out he was the one who waits all along. In the goofiest reveal ever. And while I was watching this, all I could think was, is this season still supposed to be a jumping on point for new viewers? Because none of them are going to understand the significance of this. There's probably even a decent amount of people who have been watching the show for years who still don't know what the significance of Sutekh is. And for all the things I like in this episode, it really does feel like it bubbles down to name recognition and fan service in its final moments, which, I don't know, I don't think that was the best move.
Oh no!
Okay, this is it. The finale. Let's see what Russell has up his sleeve. This episode immediately had me a little concerned because Sutekh destroys the entire universe in a sequence that's quite similar to Infinity War and may have been ripped from Infinity War. We know for a fact that Russell likes Marvel movies. Yes, at the very beginning of this episode, all of reality itself gets destroyed, which I think is part of a problem that's been brewing with the show for a while now, which is that each finale thinks it has to up the stakes of the last one. So every year now, we're pretty much getting a finale where the entire universe gets destroyed and then reset, and it's just kind of lost all of its impact. Especially when you go out of your way to say that every sun in the universe is dead.
Every sun is dead.
But then everywhere they go throughout the episode, there's clearly a sun in the sky. It just feels sloppy. There's a lot more that happens at the beginning of this episode that I don't even want to get into, like Sutekh revealing he's been attached to the TARDIS since Pyramids of Mars, which carries some big implications with it, but also paved the way for some great memes, so I'm not complaining. Or the clunky way that exposition is conveyed in the scene when Sutekh is explaining his evil plan.
I created an apparition of her universally every time we landed on every single world.
I bring Sutekh's dust of death.
At one point, the Doctor just pulls out a space iPad and starts watching scenes from Pyramids of Mars, and I can't help but feel like there could have been a more creative way to convey this information to the audience. Or how weirdly easy it is for the gang to just create a new TARDIS once Sutekh steals theirs. Or the jarring tonal whiplash of going from a scene where everyone in the universe dies to a wholesome comedic scene where the Doctor, Ruby, and Mel are trying to fly the memory TARDIS.
Can it fly?
No idea.
And then just back to sadness once they remember what just happened. But let's just jump forward to the third act. So, it seems completely over for the Doctor and Ruby. Sutekh is an invincible, all-powerful god who holds all the cards. How could the Doctor possibly get out of this one? Well, in the memory TARDIS, a whistle kind of like falls on him from out of the ceiling.
Handy.
And when he's confronting Sutekh, he blows the whistle, and a random laser that was not set up before this at all shoots out of the real TARDIS at Sutekh, and the Doctor and Ruby put a dog leash on him and pull him into the time vortex. And because Sutekh's already been in the time vortex and Sutekh is the god of death, death plus death equals life.
What happens if you bring death to death? You bring life!
So everyone that Sutekh killed comes back to life, and then Sutekh dissolves. That is terrible. That is a terrible conclusion. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely unsatisfying. There's no real emotion attached to it at all. Like, it's just so random. I don't understand why. It's that noise again. Maybe I should go investigate it. Then again, I could just sit here and draw it out a little longer. You spend all this time teasing the one who waits.
The one who waits is almost here!
And telling us that Sutekh is the most powerful being in the universe, far more powerful than even the Toymaker or the Maestro, and then he doesn't really do anything throughout the entire episode, and he gets defeated by rope. It's established that he's so strong he can paralyze people with just his mind. And yet, whilst the Doctor and Ruby are tugging him into the time vortex, he just sorta lets it happen.
Use your paralysis or like spawn in some new minions or just do something, man. Come on.
But that's not even the part of the episode I want to focus on the most. I want to talk about the very ending when Ruby's mother is finally revealed. All along, it was some random lady.
She's so ordinary.
She's wonderful.
How did she stay invisible from a god? She defeated Sutek.
She was important. Because we think she's important.
Okay, I mean, that's subversive. Here we were thinking that the reason that all this inexplicable stuff had been going on around Ruby was because she was of extraordinary origins, but apparently not. It must have been for some other reason. So, what was that reason? What was that reason? What's the explanation? This episode provides no clear explanation for anything. We don't find out why or how Ruby could summon snow into existence with just the power of her emotions. We don't figure out why the Maestro seemed terrified of Ruby's presence, like she wasn't supposed to be in this universe.
That's wrong. What do you mean?
There's a hidden song deep inside our soul!
We don't find out why the Doctor's memory of the night Ruby was left at the church rewrote itself as if time had been altered.
My memory of this keeps changing. Time keeps changing.
Also, if Ruby's mom was just a regular person who works at a hospital, why couldn't she be found through DNA tracing?
There is no trace of your mum.
None of these things have answers. Okay, Russell does provide us with one answer. We find out that the reason that Ruby's mother pointed menacingly at the Doctor wasn't because she actually knew he was there, but because she was pointing behind him at a lamp post that said Ruby wrote on it. And why did she do this?
She was pointing out the name of the road. She was naming you.
Oh.
Yeah, she was just naming Ruby. Just disregard the fact that there was literally no one else there to even see her point at the sign, and the fact that the sign wasn't there in previous episodes and was only added in the finale. Yeah, this doesn't work.
Everything about this gives off the impression that Russell came up with a super hooky mystery, the snow, the point, the clues, everything, before he'd actually come up with the answer. And when it came time to write the answer, he was more concerned with writing something that would derive shock value than writing something that was actually a satisfying or even sensible payoff to what he'd already laid down. Russell actually says directly that the reason he did this was because he liked it in The Last Jedi when they confirmed that Rey's parents were nobodies.
This is kind of my reaction to, bear with me now, those Star Wars films. The second film said that Daisy Ridley was nothing special. There was nothing special about her parentage. She just got the Force.
Ordinary.
She was just ordinary. An ordinary person with the Force. And then the next film, they changed it all so that she was the child of the Emperor. So this is my reaction to that.
I love it that you did this.
She's not the daughter of Sutek. She's not the daughter of the Time Lords or Rassilon or something like that.
So this is basically ripped out of Star Wars, except even in The Last Jedi, a movie I personally have very mixed feelings on, it's pulled off way better.
Like with Ruby, Rey finds out that her parents were nobodies, and before Rise of Skywalker came and fucked that all up, this was actually kind of meaningful. Rey wasn't one with the Force just because of her bloodline or some kind of divine right. She had earned it for herself, and when she finds out who her parents really were, all that's shaken is her own personal belief that her parents must have been important people. Here, on the other hand, the whole story up to this point ceases to make cohesive sense if Ruby's mother was just a normal person, because it contradicts everything we've seen. And it doesn't feel like it carries the same message as The Last Jedi did, where that movie turned the question of Rey's lineage back on her as a way to further her own character arc as she learns more about herself. Here, it doesn't feel like Ruby has any arc to speak of whatsoever. Ruby doesn't seem to learn or change as a result of learning who her mother is, nor does she really face any hardships to get to this point. Compare this to Russell's old season finales, which admittedly did have problems with Deus Ex Machinas, but but all centered around the theme of sacrifice. The Doctor has to sacrifice his life to save Rose. The Doctor has to sacrifice his relationship with Rose to save the Earth. Martha has to sacrifice her well-being and her family's well-being to save the Earth, which ultimately leads her to turn away from the Doctor. And the Doctor loses the only other living member of his species. Or so he thinks. Donna has to sacrifice herself to save the universe. Even in the end of time, the Doctor has to sacrifice himself just to save Wilfred. This is where the drama stems from, and I can't help but feel like it's lacking in Empire of Death. And the ingredients for Ruby to have to make a sacrifice were right there. It's established that Sutekh, for whatever reason, really wants to know who Ruby's mother is.
Show me the name. Show me, child.
But can't find her because, fuck if I know. So he tries to get the information from Ruby, and before he can see it, she destroys it.
Waiting for so long.
You great big god of nothing.
No.
If this had been Ruby truly giving up the one chance she ever would have had to find her mother, then the scene would have been more impactful, but she'd already looked at the monitor before she destroys it, so she's not really sacrificing anything at all by smashing it other than, like, a new gaming monitor. Ruby actually gets on with her birth mother so well that she starts referring to her as her real mom.
But she never told him, my real mum.
Which I feel personally is a little disrespectful to the person that actually put in the work to raise you. And at the very end of the episode, Ruby reveals that she will be leaving the TARDIS because she wants to go find her dad.
Oh my god. I think they found him. My dad, William, they think. So we've got to go, and... I'm sorry.
And I just didn't feel anything while watching this scene. It didn't feel meaningful at all.
Even similar companion exits like Martha's back in Series 3 resonate with me a lot more. Martha also leaves the TARDIS of her own free will, but there it really feels like the conclusion to a series-long character arc. After spending an entire season being infatuated with the Doctor and constantly being overlooked, she finally decides to put herself first. That in tandem with the fact that her family was put through hell in her last adventure with the Doctor, and she's now disenfranchised. It's not like she doesn't like the Doctor anymore, but she knows that she deserves better.
Arthur Jones, you saved the world.
Yes, I did. I spent a lot of time with you thinking I was second best, but you know what? I am good.
This is really meaningful to me.
Spent all these years training to be a doctor, now I've got people to look after. So this is me. Getting out.
Meanwhile, with Ruby's exit, I'm not even 100% sure why she's leaving. Maybe you could argue that Ruby's arc is learning that she's just a normal person and there's nothing special about her. But she never acted like she was special or better than anyone else around her, and it never seemed like she wanted to be treated differently from others around her. In fact, the only reason she ever would have thought she was special is because the Doctor told her as much.
I'm just clumsy.
No, you're not. It's worse than that.
Regardless, it's difficult to see how her behavior actually changes across the season. Let me just put it this way. In The Last Jedi, Rey learns that she's not defined by her lineage and that she should be her own person. In this season of Doctor Who, Ruby's entire story is defined by the question of her lineage, and when she finds out who her mother is, she ends up leaving her life with the Doctor behind just so that she can be with her, having discovered seemingly very little about herself in the process.
Oh, by the way, this is just a personal nitpick, but Sutekh is not the god of death in Egyptian mythology, and now a whole new generation is going to think Sutekh is the god of death, and it pisses me off. You know, in the actual lore of Sutekh, he ate lettuce that had cum on it and then got pregnant. I'm not even making that up. That's the story of Sutekh they should have adapted. I would have loved to see that hit the big screen in glorious 4K. Could have really seen the detail on the cum lettuce.
Let's use the TARDIS to go back in time about 3 hours to when I was talking about the verisimilitude spectrum. It's very clear that Russell does not value logic whatsoever, if he really ever did. And I think that that's a mistake. I argued that Doctor Who belongs somewhere around here on the spectrum, and this new season is somewhere over here. It's not just about suspending your disbelief anymore. Now the show actively breaks its own rules, pretty much whenever it's convenient for Russell. He's pretty much openly said that there are parts of the finale that don't really make sense, and even said on the episode's commentary that there was going to be an explanation for where the whistle came from, but he cut it because he wanted the end of the episode to be paced in a certain way.
So here in the script, we shot this. He takes the whistle and he goes to a little floor compartment in the TARDIS and he drops it down. So he created the whistle himself and passed the whistle to his younger self. However, it was just a bit much in the middle of a chase, wasn't it? It was like, even I wrote it and I started thinking, what's he doing?
Oh no, it was good. I thought it was great.
It was good. Love my whistle. And that's when he went and did it.
Yeah.
And we lost it though.
Meaning we're left with an episode where the solution literally drops out of the sky into the Doctor's hands. At that point, why not just have the Doctor find a button that says win on it to defeat the bad guys? This new season has really exposed the flaws with the original binary I drew between logic and themes, because the fact of the matter is that I think this season is a perfect example of when a lack of logic also impedes on the themes. Episodes like Empire of Death are so garbled and confused it's difficult to even take anything from it. That's what greatly confuses me when I see a lot of people defending this season by saying that it doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense because the themes are all that's important. Like, yeah, themes are important, but what's just as important is how you present those themes to the audience and how well they will resonate. The medium is the message. And in my eyes, even though this season tries to tackle a lot of interesting themes, like the idea that the most regular person in the universe could be the most important, it doesn't do it very well, especially since the show has tackled that exact theme in the past and done it better.
And for one moment, one shining moment, she was the most important woman in the whole wide universe.
She still is. She's my daughter.
And maybe you should tell her that once in a while.
I'm sorry, but Russell's been saying in interviews for a while now that we need to watch closely and pay attention to the details, and eventually satisfying answers will come. And that wasn't true.
Answers are coming. Don't worry. I'm not going to do that vague science fiction thing of going, oh, we might find out one day. Big answers on their way.
The answer to why Ruby was able to make it snow, or why the Trickster's theme from the Sarah Jane Adventures played, was that there was no answer. Yes, I've been online and I've seen all the theories people have come up with to explain this, like saying it was actually Sutek doing it to try to deceive the Doctor into thinking it was important. Even though it's established that Sutek himself clearly thought that the identity of Ruby's mom was important, which would imply he, got tricked by his own deception? Or that it was the line of salt, which is, I've already covered why that's just dumb. But I honestly don't think Russell really intended an explanation, at least not in the sense we're used to.
To fantasy felt like a very natural direction. It's always been on the edge of Doctor Who. It's always had little nods towards making a science fictional sense of fantasy elements, and I just decided to start dropping the nods and not even pretending that there's any rational explanation to this, that wild forces are at work in the universe.
It's pretty clear from the way he wrote it that Ruby's emotions on their own were able to manifest snow in reality because this just isn't really a sci-fi anymore. But again, like I said before, fantasy or no, the story still has to make sense in accordance with its own rules. Like, pretty much any fantasy story I can think of still has clear explanations for why what happens, even if it is the power of love. But here, can every orphan do this, or just Ruby? What about the time it snowed in the TARDIS when Ruby wasn't even there? What about the thing with the maestro? There's no explanation. Though that won't stop fans from trying. And look, having a personal headcanon for your favorite show is completely fine. I just take issue with the subset of people that have become so passionate in their headcanons that they've begun calling other people idiots for not seeing the obvious, even though there's no fandom consensus on what the obvious actually is. It's funny that I already went over the toxic negativity surrounding this new era of the show online, because I think just as interesting to analyze is what I can only describe as toxic positivity surrounding it. Oh, sorry. Do you need everything to be spelled out to you? Russell is obviously pursuing a more intelligent and subtle form of storytelling this season, and if everything's going over your head, well, that's not his problem. It's kind of your problem. I
hate this talking point because not only does it blame the audience for things the writers should have conveyed better, but it conflates subtlety with cohesion.
Firstly, nothing Russell wrote this season is even slightly subtle. Every single theme is pretty much stated out loud by the characters, and in the case of Ruby's mom, the theme itself becomes the in-universe explanation for why everything happened. She was special because we thought she was special.
There's a difference between something being left up to interpretation and something being nonsensical.
It's like everything I said about the bi-generation dialed up to 11.
Russell's made it very clear he's trying to bring in a mainstream audience with this season. If you leave gaping holes in the story like this, no amount of headcanon is going to solve the fact that the majority of people will walk away from this episode feeling deeply confused. Because most of the clues we got led absolutely nowhere. They're gonna start catching on to the fact that you're playing them for fools, and it will be harder for them to actually get invested in future plot lines. Like, we never found out who Mrs. Flood is in Empire of Death. I guess that's carrying into the next season.
Oh, what happens to that mysterious traveler in time and space? I'm sorry to say his story ends in absolute terror.
But, to be honest, I don't really care anymore. I don't have any reason to believe it will actually have a satisfactory conclusion.
And at this point, I feel like it's only here to generate buzz. The same thing is true of this season's other mysterious old woman character played by Susan Twist. Yeah, Russell really honed in on mysterious women mystery boxes this year. This season puts a lot of focus onto the Doctor's long-lost granddaughter, Susan.
My granddaughter.
Susan.
So everyone thought that Susan Twist would be revealed to be Susan in a twist. But she wasn't. And unless Susan's gonna end up being Miss Flood or something, all those references to her were just there to mislead people.
Time Rose were murdered. Maybe it killed her too.
Red herrings are one thing, but this is basically just like clickbait storytelling.
I didn't exactly know what the ending was. I said, we kept on saying you'd have a big part. It's very much kind of internet age storytelling where you just hope it'll generate content. It's kind of proved to be very popular. People are really taking off with it.
Okay. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Doctor Who's completely innocent of ever having done stuff just for the sake of generating content in the past, but I don't think I've ever seen one of the showrunners admit to it like this. I mean, props to him for being honest, I guess, but you shouldn't be writing things into your episode just for the sake of generating internet buzz and keeping people's attention artificially.
There's just okay, you know what? I'm going to investigate this. Screw it. What? There's no one in here. It's just a completely ordinary closet. That doesn't make any sense. Where was the sound coming from? Wait a second. What if that's the whole point? What if this noise was only important because we thought it was important? I mean, I thought it was important, and you guys thought it was important, and it definitely kept you watching the video, which means it generated content, and maybe that's what really matters at the end of the day. Like, oh no, actually that sound's just coming from my furnace. Our furnace is supposed to make that sound. Unfortunately, it seems like a large percentage of active Doctor Who fans have just kind of resigned themselves to this fate. I have seen a very large amount of people say something along the lines of, okay, yeah, that finale did kind of suck, and it didn't really make any sense, and it didn't satisfactorily wrap up any of the season's arcs, but that's how Doctor Who's always been, so why should we expect anything different? I think if anything's a sign of how long Doctor Who has been stuck in the same place, it's the fact that people have become convinced it can't change. As if it's incapable of reshaping itself, which is what it was literally designed for. Now, it's become a popular narrative to blame Disney for some of the discrepancies in this season.
Like, for instance, episode 2 confirms that Ruby's been traveling with the Doctor for 6 months at this point, but then we find out in the next episode that apparently she's never been to an alien planet before.
Your first time on a new planet. It flips your stomach, doesn't it?
And what exactly were they doing for all that time if they never went to an alien planet, just like hanging out in Cardiff? So because of this, a lot of people suspected that Disney had messed with the order of the episodes.
But Russell himself came out and debunked this. He claims this is how it was always supposed to be, which just makes me think that this season wasn't super well planned out. The ratings were supposed to go up this season, but they went down yet again because not enough thought went into making this a good jumping on point.
Like, genuinely, how many random Disney Plus goers do you think watched Space Babies and decided based on that they wanted to keep going with the series? Like, seriously, if you're trying to get young people to watch it, why is it airing at midnight? It may be fitting that they reused an old logo for this era because it still feels in many ways like the show is scared to truly change itself at its core, even with some experimentation this year. And it may not truly change until a completely new creative team is at the wheel.
Overall, there were some great things about this season, and there was some genuine growth. There is a streak of episodes in this season that I think are genuinely good, but overall, it's still just not clicking. And if I had to become a doctor myself for a second and diagnose Doctor Who,
I think the root cause of a lot of its problems is how it's managed. To be more specific, it seems like right now Russell T Davies has complete and total creative control over the show. More questionable decisions or mistakes which would have been caught by more involved writers or producers are slipping through. It's kind of like the George Lucas effect, where one person who was instrumental in the success of an IP gets given complete and total creative control over it, finds themselves surrounded by yes men, and all of their ideas, good and bad, end up making it through to the final product.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
This is a slippery slope because I don't want to suggest that creative control should be taken away from an auteur, but for a show like Doctor Who that prides itself on variety and exploration, does it not make sense to have a large creative team of diverse writers behind it? Why have virtually everything be written by the same guy? If you want to do an episode about music, why not bring on someone who actually knows something about music? If you want to do an episode about racism, why not bring on a writer of color who has a deep personal understanding of the issue? Let me be clear, I am not advocating for the sacking of Russell T Davies, sorry Chris, but I don't think he should have all the power. I truly believe that if you fix this problem, a lot of the other issues with the show will disappear almost immediately. The show would finally feel like it was free of the same few ideas and formulas being recycled over and over. And depending on which new writers you bring in, the show might start actually taking verisimilitude seriously, which I think is currently hampering its quality a lot. I think any way you spin it, it is time for new blood to run through Doctor Who's veins. Who knows, maybe the show's production could even not be extremely scuffed and littered with controversies going forward. Maybe. Though the way that the recent controversies with Millie Gibson were handled, in that no one stepped up to defend her, doesn't bode super well.
I do want Doctor Who to succeed, but I am worried about its future right now. Especially now that we've seen that the ratings have plummeted even further from Jodie Whittaker's era. But I haven't given up hope, nor will I, because no matter what happens to Doctor Who, no matter how rough the road ahead may be, this will always be the show that I love and the show that defined my childhood more than any other. So let me leave you with this. There's an old saying, a phrase of great power and wisdom and consolation to the soul in times of need.
Time travel is really hard to write about.
Wow, what a video. I think I've pretty much just given up trying to reel myself in, and I'm just gonna make videos that are whatever length I feel that they need to be, and maybe they'll take 4 months to make. We'll just have to deal with that. But regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed watching the longest video I've ever made. It definitely took a slab of my soul to get this done, so I hope it was worth it. I'm gonna go relish in the fact that I chased Matt Pat off YouTube with my Five Nights at Freddy's video. You know it's true, he quit one day after I uploaded my video. It can't be a coincidence. If you guys liked this video, you could have seen it earlier on my Patreon for the low price of whatever it happens to be when you check it. Might change. Not only that, but you could have seen an earlier version of it and given me feedback on what you thought I should cut or change. And of course, a warm shout out to my current patrons, those being A-Camp, McLovin, No D Pop, Hernandez, JH, Bitter Old Woman, Kibby Sabrina, Bill Skates, and Fiddlestinks. Plus new members Yehuda Katz and Trish Ledoux. I hope I pronounced that right. You all make it happen. The Absorbable Off. The Living Fat Creatures. Pete, remember Pete? Spearhead from Space. Pyramids of Mars. Time Lash.
Genesis of the Daleks.
Delta and the Bannermen. Delta and the Bannermen. Gareth Roberts.
You must take the load.